Okay, you can go ahead, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I call to order this special meeting of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good morning to one and all, and I want to thank all of you who are joining us via the live stream video this morning. We are meeting virtually today, and I want to remind everyone that Minnesota's open meeting law allows us to conduct meetings by electronic means in situations like this. And I think we're all getting pretty good at it, but for the Regents, just a very quick refresher on our protocol for this meeting. First of all, as you are accustomed to now, all votes will be recorded by roll call. This is required by the open meeting law. For any action before us today, Mr. Steves will take the roll. At the start of each discussion, I'll call on Regents for their questions and comments, sometimes starting at the top of the alphabet or at the end, or maybe someone somewhere in the middle. So stay on your toes. If you don't wish to speak, you're welcome to pass. I will proactively call on each of you once per agenda item. If you wish to speak out of order or you wish to speak a second time on a topic, please use the raise hand feature within Zoom or alert Jason Langworthy via text that you wish to speak. Staff will keep a speakers list for me. Please do not talk over others or jump in without being recognized. Regents and presenters will be muted until I call on them to speak. So please don't mute and unmute your line. The staff will handle that for you. Please allow for a brief pause after you're called on and before you start speaking. And finally, I remind everyone that although we can't see our audience, today's meeting is live. It is open to the public via a live stream video, and it will be archived on our website for later viewing. So with that, we have a number of important items of business before us today. So let's dive in. The first item on our agenda today is a formal review and action on principles to guide academic and financial decision-making in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. At our last meeting, several of you, led by Regent Beeson, commented on the desire for principles to guide decision-making as we navigate the weeks and months ahead. So I want to thank you, and I think you'll find today's discussion and action very reflective of those suggestions. With that, President Gable will begin by providing an update on administrative actions taken since our last board meeting on April 7th, before outlining and seeking adoption of the proposed principles. So with that, President Gable, good morning, and over to you.
Good morning, Chair Powell, Vice Chair Svigum, members of the board. It's nice to see you, even virtually, and I hope that you and yours are healthy, safe, and well. I want to start by continuously reiterating our thanks to everyone for how they've stepped up, faculty, staff, students, community partners, clinicians, everyone on the front lines, everyone behind the scenes who have enabled this fine institution to meet this challenge in the way that it has. I have to give a special shout out to Chancellor Black and our UMD Bulldogs family, because today is National Bulldogs Day, for your information, something that we can all enjoy. And I have some personal experience with Bulldog communities. So from Athens, Georgia to Duluth, Minnesota, I will say that Bulldogs are the ultimate companion, and they make us all feel supported. They are fiercely loyal, and they make us proud. As part of that pride, system-wide, and as part of the summary of the administrative actions that we've taken to date, I want to remind everybody that we are in a position to promote so much good news around what is a very difficult and challenging time. And I encourage everyone to refer to the social media hashtag UMNProud if they need a pick-me-up or a reminder of the good work that this entire community is doing. From last week's Food and Drug Administration approval of the university-designed Coventor ventilator, which is a practical and scalable version of a ventilator that is the first of its kind that we know of to reach the front lines in healthcare, to the generosity of partners like 3M, which is providing a very appreciated $2 million gift in recognition of our medical school as a federally designated infectious disease containment center, and as a representation of the company's dedication to advanced science which is one of the gifts they've made around the world in this effort, to our work with the state on the development of protective equipment, drug trials, testing, our Medical Reserve Corps working on the front lines. There's so much good news, and I think we all need good news these days, and so I encourage you all to look at that. Members of the board, at the special meeting we had on April 7th, I shared with you a range of university decisions in response to the challenges presented by this pandemic. Some of those are still in progress. In particular, the Emergency Management Committee continues to meet. We're very lucky to have widespread representation. Deans, faculty, the chancellors, our subject matter experts, vice presidents. We're also very lucky to be able to consult with subject matter experts like our own Mike Ulsterholm, who speaks regularly with Vice President Kramer. I spoke with him yesterday. Our partners in the Department of Health, the governor's office, DNR, and other agencies who are developing protocols and sharing their best practices. I'm very lucky to be able to participate with other presidents through the AAU. We had our regular group call yesterday where we discussed our common practices. I'm a member of the business partnership, which allows me to hear what's going on in the private sector. We have a call weekly that I participate in and have presented to. I've also presented to a couple of national webinars on what we're doing here. So we are looking at our efforts internally across our sectors and divisions, relying on our subject matter experts on campus and in the state, and very plugged in nationally in the efforts and approaches that we are bringing forward to you. The main thing we have done since impaneling and making the first round of decisions around emergency management is take some quick action around savings that I believe we've reported, but that I wish to remind you of. The cabinet, including me, are voluntarily taking a 10% salary cut starting at the beginning of the fiscal year on July 1st and lasting until our operations return to normal. That is a first step. It is not intended to be the last conversation that the senior leadership has around salary or other conversations that will happen around salary, some of which we will discuss further. Approximately 200 of the university's senior leaders system-wide are contributing a full week of unpaid work before the end of the current fiscal year. That effort is underway. For all employees, we are freezing merit increases, bonuses, and other salary adjustments in the upcoming fiscal year. This is a recommendation that will ultimately be subject to your approval, but is part of the assumptions that we're making in our planning. This takes into account our obligations and commitments to labor represented faculty and staff and honoring collective bargaining agreements, which will be handled separately. I also shared with you last time we met, and am sharing with you more officially today, our intent to propose a tuition freeze for the 2021 academic year, subject to your approval. This freeze is a recommendation in support of the challenges our students are meeting and is a part of the budget discussion that we need to take into consideration. But collectively, this represents a range of actions that right through the gate save the university system somewhere between $40 and $50 million in cost savings. And there are more details around that the governor will, that Brian Burnett will be discussing in addition to things that we're working on with the state. The CARES Act, which is federal support, is underway. Our estimate, we don't have final word on this yet, is a total of $36 million in support, half of which, or $18 million, will be direct student support. And Senior Vice President Burnett will be talking with you in his report about the early steps we're undertaking to determine how to distribute that support to students in ways that are fair and equitable and clear. And while it's difficult for us to estimate the total impact of the pandemic, given the number of variables remaining, we look forward to talking with you further about our strategy as it unfolds. We remain in and in compliance with the governor's stay-at-home order for all Minnesotans until May 4th, and are hearing from regularly the governor's team of commissioners on how that looks going into the future. And we will work together with all of them on that, although we have certainly started to plan for the predictable contingencies around how we would implement changes to that order going forward. But in the meantime, all summer courses are online via what we would call alternative learning formats, much like we've done for the remainder of the spring, but with the known status for summer are able to dig a little deeper and think a little more strategically with some advance notice about how we stand up the summer curriculum. Provost and Executive Vice President Rachel Croson will be discussing that with you, in addition to the early stage planning for fall. Non-curricular activities for the summer have been canceled or postponed until June 30th, and we will make decisions about other activities that would be occurring after July 1st, a little later, probably in the latter part of May or early June, as more evidence becomes available upon which to base those decisions. With regard to commencement, plans are underway and have been announced for a system-wide fun virtual commencement for spring 2020 graduates, which will take place across the system on May 16th, with the exception of the medical school, which had a pre-planned event for May 1st, which we are honoring that date. So we can't replicate all of the joy or tradition of a classic commencement. We have to do it this way, and we know that's a disappointment for many families, and I've shared with all of you that my own family is affected. I have a son graduating from high school and a son graduating from college, so I'm right there with you in experiencing this disappointment and difficulty in honoring and acknowledging the hard work of our students and of their families who've made sacrifices in order for them to reach this point. But I can commit to you, we're doing everything we can to make this fun, to acknowledge what students and their families have accomplished virtually, with some sort of follow-up event in the fall to be determined as we are able to gather more information about ways in which we are reopening in the fall. The theme for the virtual celebration is Hail to Thee, which is a reference from Minnesota's state song and was chosen to reflect our admiration for the class of 2020's incredible resilience in these very strange and stressful times. And we will be announcing more information to the members of that graduating class as things continue. But as we finish out the spring semester, which is nearing its end and will culminate in a virtual commencement celebration, we need to pivot forward into planning for the future. We know that we have to think about our financial circumstances. We have to think about our academic and research mission, and we need to have a plan in order to be in a position where we want to be as we move into the next chapter. So as we pivot, we have empaneled 2 working groups that will be guided by a distinct set of guiding principles subject to your approval today. They are developed with a commitment to shared governance. They are representative working groups that have system representation, faculty and student representation, and staff representation. They are charged with providing recommendations for me to then bring to you on 2 very important topics. So the first team, which is focused on academic and research, is led by Provost Rachel Croson and Vice President Chris Kramer. It will examine opportunities for the university to thrive in the future, including potential new approaches to enrollment, programming, courses, research, and other efforts to ensure the university remains a destination of choice for students, faculty, and staff. Ultimately, they are looking at curating the mission of the institution and what it will take to do so while we go through the valley of financial constraints and distance, and also with an eye to who we are and what we are and how we emerge stronger as we experience the sunrise of the pandemic ending. In the spirit of really important and partnered shared governance, and in solidarity with the administration and the board, I want to express appreciation, acknowledgement, and recognition of our faculty, and in particular, the Faculty Senate's commitment to discuss a proactive declaration of financial stringency at its April 23rd meeting and what that might mean in the future. And it's a way that we are so grateful for seeing how working together can help us emerge stronger from where we are today. The second team, which is focused on finance and operations, will be led by Senior Vice President Brian Burnett and Interim Vice President Ken Horseman. This team is examining opportunities for operational and personnel cost savings and efficiency, with an emphasis on maintaining employees as a recognition of everyone's value to the institution and contribution to the enterprise, and also to the fact that we sit in a competitive workplace market, which is fundamentally hibernating today, but will reopen, we hope very soon, and will affect our future as a result. We want to make sure we're appropriately staffed and ready when regular operations resume. The team is also focusing on opportunities to continue capital projects and utilize reserves as appropriate to work with the state to ensure annual support and to include and sustain our medical enterprise, amongst others. These teams are anchored in guiding principles that overlay and are the starting point for any detailed work that they would do and their charge going forward. The academic working group has a set of principles that are around ensuring the safety, health, and wellness of our students, ensuring the continuity of the student academic experience and support for research-related initiatives, including and emphasizing mentor sections, leveraging our competitive advantage of world-class excellence in teaching, discovery, and engagement, with strong emphasis on the COVID-19 pandemic now and into the future. The delivery of instruction and learning models and short and long-term visions that emphasize alternate ways of thinking, and then making decisions with respect, transparency, and timeliness with the best interests of our faculty, staff, and students in mind. The Finance and Operations Working Group has related principles to guide them to support the university's academic research and outreach mission, with emphasis on research that directly addresses the COVID-19 pandemic, the prioritization and retention of our current workforce to the greatest extent possible, balancing strategic financial decisions with maintenance of the mission, scrutinizing all budgets to identify efficiencies, positioning the university for short and long-term financial viability, and also making decisions with respect to transparency and timeliness with the best interests of our students, faculty, and staff in mind. The Finance and Operations Working Group is making assumptions of flat tuition and assumptions of capital projects continuing. Those are board decisions that they are incorporating into their decision-making until the board would decide otherwise. The committees have been impaneled and charged, but we're continuing to do broader shared governance of town halls, feedback loops virtually, and of course, one-off conversations with whomever comes forward with questions or feedback, and there has been a lot of that. So with that collective report, Mr. Chair, on where we are in terms of administrative decision-making and where we're heading, I conclude my presentation.
All right, thank you. Thank you, President Gable. So then, as a reminder to all my colleagues on the board, this is before us for action today. Before we move to discussion, I'd entertain a motion to adopt the principles to guide academic and financial decision-making in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, as outlined in the docket. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved and seconded to approve the principles to guide academic and financial decision-making. We'll turn now to our discussion, and we will begin with Regent Anderson, please.
I will pass on discussion on this. I've got the principles and I'm fine with them.
All right, thank you, Regent Anderson. Regent Beeson. Regent Beeson.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me?
Yes.
I will pass on this part of the agenda.
Itano?
Thank you, Regent Beeson.
Hi.
Regent Davenport.
First, I'd like to again thank everyone for their hard work, and I think these principles and guidelines are very appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Herr. Regent Herr, can you hear us?
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I have no comments at this moment.
Thank you. Thank you, Regent Herr. Regent Hsu.
Okay. Yes, in the back.
Regent
Thank
Hsu.
you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little bit concerned about the fact that we have two work groups that, depending on how they work together, could work. But we have one group concerned about investment in costs, and the other group just seemingly working without that type of charge. And so, I would actually prefer having one group, but to the extent that you need to have two groups, I just want to make sure that they're working together. And there's also the problem with, I also have a problem with the timeline. I think June 1st is way too long for these committees to be working. And that's still over 40 days, I think, by my count. And so I've got concerns on the fact that there are two groups and also the length of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. President Gable, would you like to comment on those questions posed by Regent Hsu?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regent Hsu, the chairs of each of the working groups are ex officio on each other's committees. So we want them to be able to focus, but neither of them are working in a vacuum. And so that's how we're maintaining the collaboration across the two committees. The Finance and Operations Working Group is expected to make its first report at the May board meeting. If there are items there that are necessary for urgent action, we would bring them forward in that way at that time, or seek a specially called meeting if necessary. June 1st is not the first time you would hear from them on recommendations. And if as more data and information becomes available, if the financial circumstances dictate, they can always accelerate. But we want to give them time to pull together data, to do research, to explore best practices, to study for consequences. And so the first report of recommendations would be at the May board meeting, along with the budget recommendations. We assume that their recommendations would come through in parallel with that cycle. Thank you.
Thank you, President Gable. Regent Hsu, any follow-up?
No, I'm good for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Kenyana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, President Gable, for assembling the work groups and in a way that's consistent with our values of shared governments and yours as well. I have a quick question, not about the work groups, but about under pandemic updates. Do we know what the savings are that will be realized through the cabinet and senior leader voluntary pay reductions?
President Gable.
Chair Powell, Regent Kenyanya, I'll have to defer to Senior Vice President Brian Burnett for those estimates. I will mention before we turn it over to him that the savings calculation is an estimate at this point, because the in writing confirmation that each individual person needs to make in order for those savings to be realized is in process right now.
Senior Vice President Burnett, is this a point that you can touch on in your financial discussion, which is coming later today?
I can certainly do that if you'd like me to hold it until then, Regent Powell. Sure.
Regent Kenyana, would you be okay if we addressed your question, at a later
Absolutely.
Kind of full? Okay, thank you.
That would be fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. Regent Mayron.
I am impressed with these principles. I understand the need for two working groups. I'm pleased to hear that there is each the chair sits as ex officio on the other committees with the other committee group in order to ensure communication and continuity. And while all of us would like to see answers to these issues as soon as possible, I'm satisfied that the timeline that you've proposed is something that is needed in order to do the good, solid work that will guide our institution into the future. So thank you for this work.
Thank you, Regent Mayron. Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Powell. I would comment at this point only on, while I understand Regent Hsu's and perhaps other regents' interest in fast and repeated or sooner rather than later information and outcomes. From my perspective, I think quality of data inputs will always trump the the quantity of times we hear about them or the speed to which we can reach a conclusion. And so I'm always going to encourage the administration to make sure they're getting the best information they can. And if that means we wait a little bit longer, I think the quality of the output and the quality of the governance decisions we can make in reflection or in support of what the administration is recommending will always be a better dialogue. So I just would weigh in at this point that I think the work I'm seeing here is exactly what I'd like to see from a governance perspective, and take the time you need to get better inputs rather than more opportunities to communicate with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Regent McMillan. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good dialogue, good materials. I do have some concerns, and actually the timing is pretty good coming right off of Regent McMillan's remarks. I think I'll in no particular order here. One of the concerns, or I shouldn't say concerns, one of the questions I have is, and this is, again, I guess kind of laser focused, but under the Finance and Operations Working Group, when language is important, I think, because as we're a few months down the line here, or even a few weeks for that matter, if we raise some questions about, if we have questions about what has come forward from these groups, we may be referred back to these points that we here would be adopting, and so I want to be really careful about what we adopt. But one of the lines is under the Finance and Operations Work Group. It says prioritize retention of current workforce to the greatest extent possible, and while it kind of has a mom and apple pie feel to it, when you say prioritize and greatest extent possible, those are subjective terms that I think have to be placed in context. For instance, we're talking about if it's in the context of a tuition freeze or better, and that's sort of the baseline of what we're doing, then prioritizing this retention component becomes, I think, maybe a little bit less challenging. At the same time, that particular bullet would seem to obviate or seem to remove any prospect of these groups looking at ways that we can do things better, not just to address the current circumstance, but even for improving our operations going forward. And so I'm a little bit concerned about such broad language like that really, essentially says above all else, because it says prioritize, we're going to maintain the status quo of how we're currently structured as a workforce. That seems to, one, create a problem for dealing with this, particularly if the pandemic has a dramatic multi-year impact on our operations, which it certainly seems like it'll have some level of multi-year impact, but if it's a really dramatic one, that would seem to be handcuffing the administration and the board in our capacity to find opportunities there. And there are other, I think, significant values that are also priorities. And so that I just want to make very clear that to the extent that I would support the language here, I'm not reading that language to say that's prioritized above all other values within the institution. So take that for what that is. I do think that Regent Hsu makes some, brought up a couple of pretty good points for how these committees interplay. I appreciate President Gable's response that there is going to be that communication between the groups. One thing that stands out to me, particularly when you think about what we've spent an awful lot of our board's time on recently, is I would like to see a third committee, and I don't like to build these things too dramatically. I mean, I suppose you could add a fourth or a fifth, but one of the things that I don't see particularly present, at least in the language, and maybe this will come out in the subsequent conversation, but I think that a committee that is focused on student success is really critical, because as you go through this process, not only are we talking about sort of affordability issues, but right now a lot's going on in society, and I would want to ensure whether one of these committees gets assigned that responsibility or whether we set up a separate committee that has strong student representation and involvement. You know, we want to make sure that the pandemic and the shock to the system that it is causing right now causes groups that have been historically underrepresented, you know, whether it's based on demographics, of personal demographics or regional demographics, but to make sure that we are working very hard to ensure that we continue to meet that mission, that we're reaching out to students and making sure that we have an affordable, world-class education that's available to and delivered to the broadest range of folks. I am concerned about the fact that, you know, I'm kind of watching what's going on across the nation and how other institutions are addressing this. You know, some have kind of called their shot on cutting costs and you know, whether it's compensation reductions or other cost considerations. If, you know, June 1st is a couple $100 million away. And this goes to Regent McMillan's point. You know, yeah, of course, we all want great data. There's no question we don't want to be just pulling things out of the air. But at the same time, if the process is so deliberate that we're seeing $200, $400, $600 million, you know, expended during that period of time, it is really going to have an impact on what options we have available to us. So time is of the essence. If, you know, we will have more capacity to address some of the shortfalls that we're going to be facing if we are timely in the decision making. And, you know, again, you know, institutions saying things such as 10% cut. Well, that's, you know, between now and June 1st, that's $20 million. Well, $20 million goes a long way toward addressing some of the gaps that we've got coming forward. So I would just maybe modify a bit what my colleague stated about, you know, quality and deliberation by saying time is particularly important, especially when there's so much uncertainty about what we'll be facing in the coming months. And then the last thing, I greatly appreciate Regent Chair Powell keeping the board informed, bringing us back on this sort of continuing basis. I want to make sure that this isn't a situation where the board turns this over to these committees and then, you know, to some extent we are stopped from expecting or requesting additional information to know what's going on through this process. I think these committees will be very well stocked with the talent that we need to be thoughtful and deliberate and come back with important information. But I want to make sure that the board doesn't get sort of, you know, that we're not perceived as saying, okay, we've now authorized these committees and, you know, we'll see you in August. I don't think that would be appropriate from our governance role. And I'm sure that's not the intent. You know, we have our meetings in the interim, and I would expect that we will get updates, but I don't, you know, I guess I just don't want to be considered so rigid that by adopting this, we are, you know, going back to somewhat of a business as usual model, but that we will continue as a board to be very engaged on sort of a weekly basis to know that that the stewardship is in concert with the shared governance, including the Board of Regents. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. President Gable, at the risk of, I think what I want to do is try to maybe just summarize Regent Rocha's points. I won't do them, this isn't going to do them justice, but just in the interest of summarizing them and then give you the opportunity to either for you or to Senior Vice President Burnett to give a bit of a response now. And I heard a concern about, you know, the retention priority, you know, overriding the need to pursue efficiencies and opportunities and ongoing savings. And so if we could maybe quickly just elaborate on that. I heard a question on the importance of student success, and does that have an adequate home, you know, in this committee structure, or is there a third one needed? I heard just you know, an urging of timeliness and of continued board engagement. And so, President Gable, if you would like to maybe comment on those to the degree that you're ready to now, or bring in Senior Vice President Burnett if he can give an assist here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Regent Rocha. I think I can take these. So I'll go from the last point back to the first point. As I stated in my report, these committees are advisory. They're advisory to me and advisory, therefore, to the board. For things that require board information or ultimately board approval, they will be brought forward as we bring forward everything else. There would be no difference, including things like the CARES Act decisions and other decisions that are happening outside the scope of these working groups. There's constant ongoing decision making that we would be making at this time of year anyway. Of course, we have this very unusual and added layer. So that's absolutely presumed in the plan. In terms of timing, we are on pace with our peers. I was on the phone with all of the other AAU presidents yesterday. So there is a desire to move quickly, and we have made many decisions quickly, including capturing savings immediately by being one of the first to implement a hiring freeze and one of the first to implement senior level pay cuts. We have reserves. We come to this position financially strong. We have risks going forward. We're at the point where we can now take a collective breath and leverage shared governance to make timely, well-paced, but also well-informed decisions, and that's what we're committed to doing. In terms of student success, in the charge to the committee, it's a cornerstone of the charge. It's not described overtly as a separate guiding principle, but service to the students is presumed. Academic affairs is at its cornerstone service. That's why research is described separately. The academic part of the team is student and faculty focused, including student success, and it's described and has been described very explicitly to that committee. So for that reason, I don't think there needs to be a third committee, although if that's the collective wisdom of the board, we would certainly take that into consideration. In any case, that committee would be making recommendations and reports to the board on how we're prioritizing students, and Sam Rosemark is offering student representation on that committee. And then last but not least, in terms of prioritizing the retention of people, the committee has been asked to approach their work with our people as our key and primary asset. I will remind the board that these are guiding principles, not a contract or a regulatory set of guidance. They are intended to set a frame for decision making, not necessarily a rank order frame. They're not listed in order. And we say prioritize our people as an acknowledgement and recommendation of their role. There's nothing in there that prohibits making decisions that affect our people, maybe in ways that they wouldn't like, but it does recognize that our starting point would be that they bring unique and tremendous value and we are committed to them. That is the extent of that. If we wanted it to say prioritize above all else, because words are important, we would say above all else, and we don't. On the same level, we say efficiency. So these things need to work together. They are sometimes at cross purposes. If this were clear, we wouldn't need the working group. So these are rubrics for the committee to use in bringing forward recommendations. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you, President Gable. I want to finish the list here, and then if there are additional questions, we can go back. Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair Paul. Thank you, President Gable and your team. I'm supportive of the work groups. I think it's. I look forward to information coming. I have a couple of questions, so I guess, and I don't know if they are appropriate now, but I'm going to throw them out there. You mentioned the CARES Act and money going to students. I received an email Sunday from a retired university employee, and his wife is still there. Let me just read the first two sentences. He says, I'm writing to you with regard to the CARES Act that allows a loan from our 401 retirement account during this difficult time. I called Securian, who said the loan must be approved by the U of M. I contacted Benefits Department, who told us that the Regents had not approved that CARES Act, and we're still deliberating on that. And I don't recall that, and I'm just wondering where we're at on that. Thank you. That's the first question.
President Gable or Senior Vice President Burnett, is there an answer now to that question, or is that one that we have to follow up on?
Mr. Chairman, Regent Simonson, that's one we need to follow up on. This is our first discussion of the CARES Act, will take place today.
All right, thank you. So Regent Simonson, thank you for that, and we'll follow up.
And the second one,
question? Yeah.
This will probably be a follow-up too, but I just want to throw it out there. The details, going back to the Finance and Operations Work Group and the short and long-term financial stability that was mentioned. How how detailed will we get, for example, on income and expenses? I'm really going to things like, we talk about fiscal emergency. At what point is that time? Do we have a 3-month, 6-month projection of income from various sources, and the same thing with expenses, so that we can look at these details? Will that be available?
So I at the risk of I think that Senior Vice President Burnett is going to get into that in more detail here in just a few minutes. Is that correct, Senior Vice President Burnett?
Yes, sir. I will be covering that in the third agenda item for you today, to at least a certain degree. Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, thank you. So we'll do that. We'll do that a bit later. All right. Any Regent Simonson, anything else?
No, thank you.
All right. Thank you. And then Regent Swigum, please.
Mr. Chairman, I'm very good with the principles laid out by President Gable, and will pass.
All right, thank you. I'll just make a few comments. I think, like all of you, I'm involved in a number of organizations, other boards, both companies, not-for-profits, and I will tell you that all of them, either immediately or fairly, early have also developed these kind of principles of how they're going to approach the situation. And I'll just tell you, they've proven to be extremely useful and valuable as, not as rules and regulations, but as guideposts. And so I do commend President Gable and her team for developing these. I think they're good. I think the structure is good. And I thank her for doing that. So I see that we have at least one regent who would like to make some additional comments. Regent Hsu, please, the floor is yours. Regent Hsu. Is there anyone else, Mr. Steves, who would like to speak? We appear to have lost Regent Hsu.
Mr. Chair.
I'm here.
Oh, okay, yeah. Regent Hsu.
I'm here. Someone just keeps turning off my microphone.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if that's, I don't know how I should take that. But thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of my questions involved our finances, which I guess I can defer until later. But I just do want to make the point again. I mean, some people think that we can wait, and I just feel that there needs to be more of a sense of urgency in terms of what we're doing. We do have a considerable payroll. We are at 100% employment. Most of the world is not, unless you're in the retail space, you're not hiring people. And I know we're not hiring people, but we're also trying to keep everybody employed. And I understand the need for that, but we do not have an infinite amount of cash and other assets. So I think we do need to have a little bit more of a sense of urgency on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. All right, I don't see anyone else with a desire to comment, and so
I think I have my hand up.
Regent, I beg your pardon, Regent Rocha, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank President Gable for that response. I will take your comments as a clarification. Again, the language "prioritize to the greatest extent possible" feels pretty strong to me, but I will take your comments as sort of placing that in context, and that does not prevent the committee or the board from taking the opportunity to look at some places where we can make some improvements. I understand that there may be a single student involved in the committees. I would, again, I think that we would be stronger. I think it's very, very difficult for one student from one perspective. You got your undergrads, you got graduate students, you got students from multiple campuses. There are significant things that I think we could talk about as an institution that we currently do that will have a financial impact on the experience students have, that will have an impact on the quality of the experience that students have as we go over these next months, semesters, years. And I really think that we should be very robust in the way we engage our students of kind of the widest range possible to make sure that we are, again, laser focused on ensuring that the student experience is maintained and we're not losing access to the students that we are engaged by the state of Minnesota to serve. So I just want to reinforce that I get it. I get we'll have some student representation on it. I believe we should be doing more than that because I think that across the nation and across higher ed, there are going to be some sea changes that will start. I think we see some of our aspirational peers already being quite aggressive in that space. And I would like to join them in that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. All right, we're going to move now to the vote. And I don't see.
Regent McMillan is.
I beg your pardon. Regent McMillan, please.
Thank you, Chair Powell. I got to get instruction on the raised hand button. I haven't quite figured that out yet. But just to be absolutely crystal clear, my comments about speed with which financial, analytical, and budgetary information comes to us in no way support or reflect any sense that there is complacency here. I believe our administration is moving with excellent commitment towards shared governance and staying at the head of the pack in terms of trying to be proactive, creative, and moving with speed. So nothing I said in any way should be taken to mean I don't want our leadership team to be moving aggressively, quickly, and very creatively, but my sense is they're doing all of that and more, and that's reflected in the letter from FCC Chair Pittenger that shared governance work is well underway. I'm only talking about the analytical and budgetary work that will support the decisions we have to make going into the next academic year. I don't want to see those rushed with poor quality data or with too many assumptions built into them. That's it.
All right. Thank you, Regent McMillan. Mr. Steves, it looks to me like there's no one else on the roster here to speak. Do you agree with that? All right. Please call the roll. The meeting's being held electronically. I'll just remind everybody the open meeting law requires that we use roll call votes, and Mr. Steves will now call the roll.
Regent Anderson.
Yes.
Regent Anderson votes yes. Regent Beeson.
Yes.
Regent Beeson votes yes. Regent Davenport.
Yes.
Regent Davenport votes yes. Regent Herr.
Yes.
Regent Herr votes yes. Regent Hsu.
Yes.
Regent Hsu votes yes. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Mayron.
Yes.
Regent Mayron votes yes. Regent McMillan.
Yes.
Regent McMillan votes yes. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Chair Powell.
Yes.
Chair Powell votes yes. Mr. Chair, there are 12 yes votes and 0 no votes.
All right. By a vote of 12-0, that motion passes. Thank you. We'll now move on to our next item of business. We'll hear an update on incoming freshman enrollment system-wide. This item is just for discussion today, but it is obviously a very important topic. Provost Croson and Vice Provost McMaster will be presenting this item. President Gable, would you like to provide a few introductory and framing remarks?
Thank you, Chair Powell. I would be delighted. So just to frame up the discussion that Provost Croson and Vice Provost McMaster will be having, we normally engage in an admissions process based on the lessons we learn from history and make nuanced projections going forward. And we don't have that this time around. So we don't throw all of our historical data out the window, but we are limited in our ability to do scientific projection based on historical data in this unusual environment we find ourselves in. So we rely very heavily in times like this on feedback loops relational methodology. I have my mole in my own house of my high school senior who is about to graduate, who is informing me as much as he's willing to speak to me at all about what is going on in the minds of high school seniors these days. Faculty have been amazing in stepping up both for our students this semester, but in terms of planning for their return in whatever form that takes in the fall. The students have been amazing in demonstrating their resiliency, both our current students and our incoming students. And we do have the benefit of some runway now in thinking about the bridge through summer and using that as a test case for some of the modifications we may need to make in the fall, depending on how the response to the pandemic unfolds. So we've committed to resources, thinking in terms of student success, as we were previously discussing, faculty support in terms of training and instructional development, some outside help there so that we can move as quickly as possible, and adjusting the portfolio to reflect the needs and expectations and wishes of the students and our increased capacity in delivering in this alternative methodology, with great appreciation, I have to say, also to the academic technologists and IT support behind the scenes who are just heroes, unsung heroes right now. So with that, I will turn this over to Provost Croson and Vice Provost and Dean of Undergraduate Education, Bob McMaster.
All right. Provost Croson and Vice Provost McMaster, it's over to you.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Thank you, President Gable, and thank you to members of the board. I am delighted to be here. I want to thank everyone who has welcomed me so warmly and helped me make this transition, especially under these difficult circumstances. This includes President Gable, everyone on her executive team, the chancellors and their staffs, the vice provost, the associate vice presidents who are part of the provost team, and the provost office staff. And I especially want to offer my sincere thanks to Provost Emeritus Karen Hansen for her willingness to stay on in an advisory role until June. At the time that she agreed to this, none of us knew what that would entail. But in my first 17 days, she has been an invaluable resource, participating in meetings, debriefing with me at the end of each day. I want to thank you, Karen, especially for your unending commitment to the University of Minnesota. So you can go ahead to the next slide, please. Great. As we think about the university's incoming students, I want to first provide you a brief sense of our summer planning and then turn our thoughts to fall enrollment. For that latter portion, Vice Provost and Dean Robert Master will describe the actions we're taking and our constant monitoring of recruitment and enrollment patterns. This spring, our instructors made a hard and sudden pivot. I want to acknowledge the extraordinary efforts of our faculty and instructors, academic technologists, instructional designers, and the college, program, and department staff and leaders across all of our campuses. Faculty with experience in distance education mentored other faculty. Staff worked around the clock to ensure successful implementation. Many put their personal lives on hold in order to deliver for our students. I'm appreciative and justifiably proud of how our community, including our students, responded to the shift to alternative delivery. While this semester we were quick and agile in emergency, we now refocus our effort toward ensuring excellence and innovating in this new environment. Planning for summer instruction is our opportunity to leverage the lessons of the spring as we thoughtfully develop online courses. Even instructors who transitioned so adroitly this spring may not have previously consciously designed an online course. Instructors need support to deliver excellence, and the university is providing the resources to help them in this task. This includes a set of resources, including individuals, seminars, and workshops and coaching to help instructors visualize what's possible in an online environment that might not be possible via in-person delivery. We're also using this opportunity to innovate. The Center for Educational Innovation is convening faculty system-wide who use experiential learning in their classes to investigate how that might be done remotely. Faculty will meet to discuss how to hold virtual science labs, art studios, music instruction, and community engaged learning, sharing best practices and generating innovative solutions that will be of value over the summer, but also in the years to come. We're also exploring Flipgrid, which is a platform for online learning that was developed here in the College of Education and Human Development and eventually sold to Microsoft. Flipgrid is a cloud-based video student engagement tool that was designed in order to make distance education feel closer. Finally, we continue with our commitment to student support. While some of the campuses offer primarily online education in the summer, or already incorporate satisfactory and non-satisfactory grading as a rule, in the Twin Cities campus, we're continuing the SNS grading option for all undergrads. At all our campuses, we're continuing our commitment to advising, instructor flexibility, and financial support through emergency funding. Following the lead of the federal government, we're pausing on loan collections for appropriate federal loans and considering a similar program for institutional loans. We're allowing students with outstanding balances to register for summer and fall courses. Please go to the next slide. We're also expanding our course offerings for the summer. We're adding capacity in high demand courses like Anthropology 1001, Horticulture 1001, Statistics 1001, Biology 1009, and 2 introductory physics courses. We're watching carefully the set of courses that are offered to ensure that students can take classes that will enable them to progress and graduate even over the summer. And we've identified a series of timely courses that we'll be offering for the first time that will be advertised to students across the system and that we believe will be of great interest. 5 examples are on the screen, and there's a longer list in the docket. These courses leverage what is great and exciting about being at a research university that focuses on impact. You can go to the next slide. As we prepare for fall 2020, the Office of Admissions has actively pivoted to distance recruitment. A set of existing activities has been supplemented with new mechanisms to recruit students and to connect with students who are confirmed. A longer list can be found in the docket, but some of these initiatives include virtual-led walking tours, current students and alumni and staff reaching out to prospective students, video messages from associate deans, and virtual appointments. I especially encourage Regents to take the virtual tour of the East Bank, West Bank, and St. Paul campuses and the other system campuses. They're engaging and authentic, and you can find links to those tours in the docket. We're exploring using an external partner to help us design an emotionally fulfilling orientation and registration for May, June, and July. We're waiting to decide on Welcome Week and orientation, which is typically held in person in August. Now I'd like to turn it over to Vice President and Dean McMaster, who will describe the state of admissions and the entering class.
Vice President McMaster.
Thank you, Provost Croson, Chair Powell, members of the board. The 2020 freshman recruitment efforts formally began on August 1st, 2019, when the UMTC application went live. The real recruitment of these students, of course, actually began years before as we started to track prospective students as sophomores and juniors in high school. Over the fall application season, all 5 campuses received thousands of applications from prospective students. Although the acceptances began in the fall, the majority of students have been accepted, waitlisted, or denied admissions during the winter months. The confirmed data provided here are for the most recent week that the data were compiled, April 13th. We now update these data every week, and we're looking at confirmed patterns every day. As of last week, several of the campuses are down from this time last year, as you can see on the graph, while the Rochester and Crookston campuses are up. Every week, we remodel our admissions data and make waitlist decisions as well. Overall, applications are down this year, 40,000 to 38,000 on the Twin Cities campus, but complete applications were up from 34,000 to 36,000. Only complete applications are considered for admission. As of last week, we've made 7% more offers than this time last year on the Twin Cities campus. Over the last few years, we've seen students waiting longer and longer to make their decision as they head towards May 1st. In 2019, for instance, 956 students, or 15% of the enrolled cohort, confirmed in the last week leading up to the deadline, That was the week of April 25th to May 1st. We also note that transfer confirms are slightly down as well. Over the last few years, we've seen a softening of the transfer landscape in confirms, and we've discussed this with the board on a number of occasions. This year, we're also pleased with the increased number of Share My Apps sent to the system campuses from the UMTC applications. The increases include Crookston up 227%, Morris up 219%, Duluth up 193%, and Rochester up 107%. The Executive Director of Admissions, Heidi Meyer, has regular conversations with high school, college counselors from our major feeders and with our Big Ten peers. She is also in constant contact with each college to ensure these admissions decisions meet the college's enrollment goals. I'm also in regular contact with my peers across the country, monitoring enrollment management decisions at other institutions. I also want to add that our admissions staff is just doing an absolutely Herculean job this year, working 24/7 in landing this class. They're just doing spectacular work. The next slide, if we could go to that, depicts some of the major events defining our admissions season. As discussed on a regular basis at the System-Wide Enrollment Management Council, we remain conscious that when the UMTC admits from the waitlist, it affects enrollment on other campuses. We're also mindful that in this unusual year, we may not meet the board's ACT target of 28. Nonetheless, we are committed to admitting an entering class that reflects geographical and demographic diversity, and that each student admitted will have the capacities to succeed at the University of Minnesota, whatever campus they enroll on. As we discussed before, there's a very strong relationship among incoming metrics of students, student success as measured by retention and graduation rates, and student indebtedness. As our graduation rates have significantly improved, our average student debt has likewise or has decreased. Over the past 20 years, the enrollment strategy at the U of M has enabled us to improve the quality of the undergraduate student body, to enhance our diversity. Last fall, 25% of the incoming class were students of color and American Indian students. Increase our 4- and 6-year graduation rates to 73% and 83% respectively, and to improve student satisfaction in all areas. Although spring 2020 represents the most challenging year in recent enrollment history, our plan is to, as best as possible, stay the course on student success while also making adjustments to ensure the fiscal health of the university. There are unknowns and challenges ahead, but I want to note that as it relates to undergraduate enrollment, the university is in a significantly better position to weather this storm because of the improvements made over the last 2 decades to the student experience, and in particular, the subsequent reputational value. I'm, of course, intimately familiar with the progress on the Twin Cities campus, but this is true across our system. So I'd like to now turn the presentation back over to Provost Croson, who's going to review several of the enrollment scenarios as we move forward with our planning for the fall. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vice Provost. Provost Croson.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Thank you, Board of Regents. On this slide, we provide 3 of the many possible fall 2020 enrollment models that we're exploring. And I want to just walk through each of these models, describe what they mean. So in this first model, the best case scenario, we are again offering face-to-face instruction in the fall. We're going to assume that the yield rates will be similar to previous years, with one exception. We know that international students with non-US addresses may struggle with obtaining student visas, and thus we're assuming that they will matriculate at a lower rate than in previous years. These assumptions were incorporated into the base budget that Senior Vice President Brian Burnett is preparing. In the moderate case, which we call scenario 1, we're considering the scenario of hybrid instruction at the start of the semester with a transition to fully in-person instruction later in the fall, and possibly with international students starting in January. Here, we're predicting somewhat lower yields than in the best case, and this is incorporated in the scenario 1 budget that Senior Vice President Burnett is preparing. Finally, in the severe case, scenario 2, we would remain under social distancing and will thus need to continue with online instruction in the fall. This scenario assumes a significantly reduced yield rate on non-reciprocity and international students, with smaller reductions in yield in Minnesota and reciprocity students. And this is incorporated into the scenario 2 budget from Senior Vice President Burnett. Next slide, please. We know what the best case scenario looks like. In-person instruction is our bread and butter. And we know what the severe case looks like from our pivot this spring and our entirely online summer. However, the moderate hybrid scenario still needs to be developed. So President Gabel asked me to convene a team to begin planning for a hybrid scenario in the fall. Participants include public health experts, academic leaders, and operational representatives. Specifically, we'll look at how to deliver in-person education safely, incorporating aspects such as social distancing in the classroom, in residence halls, in dining halls, and elsewhere. Faculty may need to design courses that can reach some students remotely and some in person, or that can be flipped from remote to in-person once it becomes safe to congregate. I look forward to working with my new colleagues to ensure that we are operationally and academically prepared for whatever scenario might emerge. Next slide, please. This is a challenging time for the university, and that's likely to continue. We remain committed to academic excellence and student success. We're monitoring events, learning from peers, and relying on expert medical and public health advice as we plan and make future decisions. Dean McMaster and I look forward to your discussion, and we're happy to answer questions. Thank you, Chair Powell and members of the board. This concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Provost Croson. Before I turn it over to my colleagues for comment and discussion, President Gabel, do you have any concluding comments that you want to make? A lot of materials just been presented.
Thank you, Chair Powell. No, I'll defer.
Okay, thank you. All right, we'll turn to our discussion now. We'll for any questions or comments from the Regents. Remember, this is a discussion item today, so look forward to hearing what your thoughts. We'll flip the order, and we will begin with Regent Swigum.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick question of Mr. McMaster, if I could. Bob, on the Share My Apps procedure, which you said is up significantly over past years, are we able to tell if there's a yield rate from that increased sharing with the other 4 campuses or not at this time?
Chair Powell, Regent Swigum, members of the board, we certainly can. We know how many students off that Share My App or in the Share My App pool have confirmed at each one of the campuses. And it varies a bit. I have the data with me. I won't go look it up, but there certainly has been some significant increases in the confirm rates from Share My App on those campuses, Regent Swigum.
Okay. Thank you, Bob. I think we need to do as much as we can, Bob, to share with the other 4 campuses our applications at the campus of Minneapolis and St. Paul. We are a system, and anything we can do to enhance any of the 5 campuses, I think is appropriate and a good thing for us to do. So just a comment from me, and I'll pass on.
All right, thank you, Regent Swigum. Regent Simonson, any questions or comments?
Just a quick one. Thank you, Chair Paul. Thank you, Provost and Vice Provost. I think Vice Provost McMaster said that the ACT, SAT, they aren't going to be required at this time. And I'm just wondering thoughts going forward. We've had discussions on that in the past and on the requirement for that. And is there any additional information or background on applicants that now that we don't have those ACT or SAT scores?
And that's a question, Regent Simonson, for Vice Provost McMaster, I think.
Yes,
yeah, please, please, Vice Provost, if you can address that.
Sure. Chair Powell, Regent Simonson, members of the board. The use of ACT is differential across the system. University of Minnesota Crookston became test optional this year. The evidence is that they're doing well with their admissions. The Twin Cities this year still required an ACT score or SAT score. And we plan based on the benefits of holistic review. We talked about this a lot, to continue to use that along with all the other metrics that come in evaluating students, especially with the large number of applications that we have. The one unknown here that we have to put on the table this year is around whether students are going to have access to these standardized tests over the summer and fall. So ACT and SAT have canceled some of the test sessions. And if in fact that proves to be a problem for our students this year, or actually for the fall 21 recruitment season, then we're going to have to step back and take a look at what we might have to do to accommodate students who won't be able to take that test.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good dialogue, and there's obviously a lot to be concerned about, but there's also a lot to be encouraged about, and I appreciate Provost Croson in our first direct interaction, Provost, what she has brought forward to us. I want to stay on that topic that Regent Simonson was just on with respect to the ACT scores. I think this is a real opportunity for the university as a system. I think it's a real opportunity for the Twin Cities campus in particular. I have not been comfortable. I guess I'd have to go back and look at my voting record as we've gone through this stuff. But, when we talk about the board having an ACT goal requirement of 28 or otherwise, I don't know what that serves. I don't know what that does for us, because fundamentally, I've looked through our mission. I've looked through the founding documents. I looked through the mission as we describe it to the world right now, and the ACT score is not mentioned anywhere. However, educating students is. Educating the industrious classes of Minnesota is. And so I think this is an opportunity where we take a step back and say, under these circumstances, we can't be so fixated on this somewhat arbitrary objective, which of course doesn't even accurately reflect, when you think of the number of transfer students and when you think about students who are exempted from the ACT, it doesn't actually even tell us really what we have, but when we focus on it the way that we have failed to fill programs. CFANS, of course, is one that stands out to me. This is an opportunity, if we are not going to be charging our administrative leaders with this, again, odd fixation on the ACT score. If the directive is to fill our classes, because from an economic standpoint, we really have no choice, you're actually going to see who we bring in as students. And we are actually going to be meeting our mission, and we're going to be educating students from all categories, whether we're talking about racial, ethnic distinctions, or we're talking geographic distinctions. Our rural communities are not served in proportion on our Twin Cities campus. This is an opportunity for us to address that. I have never been part of what I consider to be somewhat of a base insecurity of having to demonstrate to the world that we're adequate because we are able to reflect an ACT score. I don't know what the other Big Ten ACT scores are. I'm not really concerned about that. If they're meeting their mission by bringing in top students who have academic success and go on to fulfill the needs of those of their states, I think that they are doing their job. And so I would strongly urge, as we go forward in this process, to start from the baseline that all programs be filled. When you consider CFANS in particular, it has a lot of positive externalities. One is, these students are going to go back to their communities and they're going to be leaders and they're going to contribute to the economic success of our state. They're going to have relationships with legislators who ultimately will decide the kind of support the university receives. And frankly, they'll fill Bailey Hall, which also helps us economically. So that's the only comment I'll make on this topic at this point, Mr. Chair. This is an opportunity for us to take a step back, eliminate that requirement, direct our admissions team and our academic leaders to fill our classes with the applicants that come to us for the economic advantage and for the advantage of meeting our mission of educating the people of the state. And then at that point, we can take, as we go forward and continue with that model, we will know the cohort of students that we're bringing in and can focus on our continued academic success from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Regent McMillan, questions or comments?
None at this time.
Thank you. Regent Mayron.
Yes, I've got a couple questions on the recruitment activities. When I look at the materials that are in the docket, it appears to me that they differ campus by campus. Some have virtual tours, others don't, and other types of recruitment activities. Question for either Provost Croson or Vice President McMaster. Is each campus left to figure out what's the most appropriate recruitment activities for their particular campus? Is there some sort of way of communicating what is expected of each campus to ensure continuity? That's my first question. And then I have a separate question having to do with, as we look at the various scenarios, the estimates, whether they're taking into account whether students will be living on campus in residences, either part-time, full-time, or not at all, in light of the issues with respect to social distancing. So that's my other area of inquiry, has to do with how you all are looking at residential options for students on campus.
Thank you, Regent Mayron. Provost Croson, I think you may want to kick us off on those. One is sort of differences in campus by campus approach and their autonomy in that area to recruiting. And then the second question having to do with, what's the financial scenario as far as the occupancy in the dorms?
Yeah, thank you. Great questions. So on the recruitment focus, we have indeed sort of trusted each campus, and we believe that each campus has the expertise they need to think about how best to reach their students. There has been, of course, constant contact and sharing of best practices and ideas that we're comparing. And so I think there's a growing sense that this is not a one-size-fits-all situation, but similarly, we can learn from each other and leverage off each other's strengths. And so that's been, I think, the mode that we have used. On the residence halls, we are indeed tracking housing deposits as a sort of precursor measure to what we think that revenue stream is going to be. And as I mentioned before, these three scenarios, the base, scenario 1 and scenario 2, are serving as inputs into Senior Vice President Burnett's financial estimates, which include revenues. Those financial estimate includes revenues from dorms and dining and other situations.
Thank you, Provost Croson. Okay. Any follow-up, Regent Mayron?
I just want to say on the recruitment activities, I certainly can appreciate that each campus has something different to offer, and relying on the expertise of each of the administrations on those campuses to put forward what their best scenario is to attract students. But I do think that our brand is system-wide, and I do think having a baseline of what each campus is expected by way of recruitment activities, I think would be a good idea and would serve all campuses well, particularly as students are perhaps considering, if they're not getting into a particular campus that they applied to, considering other campuses at the same time as an alternative. So I think that coordination and expectation among campuses is important.
Thank you, Regent Mayron. Regent Kenyana.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First, I want to start by welcoming Provost Croson to the university, and thank you for starting under such circumstances. I think I speak for everyone when I say we look forward to formally meeting you. I appreciate the increased recruitment efforts. It was interesting to read that the chancellors are making personal phone calls. I'm volunteering, Regent Swigum and I, to call any prospective students. I don't know if that will help or hurt, but we're available nonetheless. But I think we're all hoping for that best case scenario, and I appreciate I think this 3 scenario breakdown just highlights the uncertainty. I mean, it's the same thing we were looking at financially, and it's the same thing here. There's just so much uncertainty. So I appreciate the fact that that's what the administration is working under. I also, I guess I don't know where I fall on or I fully appreciate the way we use the ACT as a metric. And that view is not influenced by my subpar performance on that test a few years back, I promise you. But I think, if we do find ourselves in one of those, in the moderate case or the severe case, it is an opportunity to increase access to Minnesota students, and then look at those students, follow them, and see were they able to succeed. I think the benchmark to getting into the university should be, are you going to be able to succeed here? And are you going to be able to get a degree in 4 years? And now it's moving to more like 3 years with PSEO and whatnot. But, if we do end up there, I think we can study those students and see if that different yield and that lower ACT average did in fact have some of the effects that maybe have been assumed or theorized before, and see what that does for the institution. Because I think increasing access to Minnesota students is always a good thing. And as that concludes my comments, but I will say, as Vice Provost McMaster was floating the idea of I guess a forced test optional, I could just imagine Regent Shu grinning. And I'm interested in hearing his remarks on the topics. Thank you, Mr.
Well, thank you, Regent Kenyana, and I think we're going to hear his comments right now. Regent Shu.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'd like to welcome Provost Croson. I think this is the first time we've seen you at a meeting, even virtually. I want to start out by talking about the SN grading options. You mentioned it briefly, but the students did start a petition about wanting to be able to select their grading options after their finals, and I think we should look at that. I know a lot of schools do that typically anyway, but we should look at that to help them kind of get through this process of having to change to online classes and not ideal circumstances. On the pandemic courses that you're offering, I think it's very interesting. I think we'll see what the interest level is. I know a lot of kids that I've talked to don't even want to talk about the pandemic, so I don't know if they'll be signing up for the classes, but good luck with that. The summer course offerings, I am very pleased to hear that you're moving forward to make sure that students are going to be able to take courses that they need to complete their degrees this summer. I would hate to have students, and this is how it used to be when I was in school. You used to just have to find something if you took summer school, and hope you could find something that would help you complete your degree. Now on the tuition, I think for the summer, I think we ought to consider a decrease. I know we haven't talked about it yet, but I think we should consider a decrease for summer tuition. I know we received a memo, and there are some schools that are doing that. I don't know that we need to go to 50%, which is where Texas is, but 10 or 20% probably would help the students. Regarding test optional, I'm just so delighted that we're having the discussion on test optional. I think looking at the data, it looks like maybe it's benefiting Crookston this year. I think it only took a pandemic, but I think we're at a place where we should be less concerned about that and more concerned about filling up our programs. And I think we need to take an opportunity here to be leaders. Before I was, when I brought this up years ago, I was told that the reason we're not doing it is because no one else is doing it. Well, now a lot of schools are doing it. And I think that, especially this year, first I thought I heard that the testing companies basically had canceled all of the testing for the year, which would force us into a test optional position. But now I hear they're trying to figure out how to survive, and they're maybe allowing you to take the tests at home, which I think is kind of ridiculous, but I don't know how they're going to do it. So therefore, I think, we should just be proactive and be leaders and announce that we're test optional. Regarding admissions, I appreciate the fact that you're admitting off of the waiting list. I brought that up a couple weeks ago in our meeting, and I've actually heard from some people who have had kids that were on the waiting list and now admitted, and those are kids that we're going to get for sure to come here. And I'm sure there's more out there, especially Minnesota kids who would really want to go to the University of Minnesota, and it might be their dream come true this year. On the Twin Cities data, looks like we're down. You didn't show what the numbers are with respect to what we normally get, but it looks like we're down about 22 to 2,300 students in the Twin Cities numbers. And I just want to make sure that we're admitting enough people. I was hoping that we would admit more off the waiting list, and then we may have to go a little bit below that to kids that we already told they couldn't come here, and maybe give them an offer. Because I think the summer melt is going to be an issue more so than ever this year. And it may have something to do with whether we're online in the fall. But, again, most important, we have to be full, and we have to, because if we're not full, we leave a hole for many years to come, for 4 years potentially. And we may also need to reduce tuition in order to get that to happen. Freezing tuition is great, as I said, but I think a tuition reduction for the fall is something we need to consider. Also, the retention of current students is going to be a factor. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to go. I've heard from friends at schools that not just here, but schools across the country where people are talking about taking a gap year if the instruction is going to be online again. And I know some kids are thriving with online classes, but some of them don't like it. And I know that there are lawsuits around the country. I don't think we've had one yet, but there are students that are unhappy with having to go online because that's not what they were sold on originally. Regarding your scenarios, I am interested in how the housing would work. Are we going to go forward and assign housing and just, act like we're going to have on-campus learning in the fall? With respect to scenario 2, I think that's the one where it starts online and then it moves to in person. I'm not sure how that's going to work in terms of the dormitories. If we start online, then are we going to, have some time where students are going to end up moving to campus, or, who knows? My personal view on that is if I listen to what the experts are telling us, it's not going to happen. So I'd like us to kind of be a little bit more upfront in terms of talking to the students about what we're going to do in the fall there. Lastly, you had a slide there that talked about the experts we're relying on. I'd like to kind of know who's serving on those committees and what kind of advice they're providing. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. That was a long list of good comments, and I just want to right now. I mean, I think they stand well, but right now, two things. One, Vice Provost McMaster, would you comment on Regent Hsu's his interpretation of the Twin Cities status right now? I mean, I was reading it a little differently in terms of where we stand versus where we want to be, and I just want to make sure that you have the opportunity to clarify and make sure we're all we're thinking about the data the right way.
Sure. Chair Powell and Regent Shu, just one comment on that. In terms of where we sit right now, and these data are just a touch newer than the ones that you had before from April 13th. We've confirmed 4,521 freshmen. Last year was 5,000, a bit over 5,000. So we're down about 10%, or about 500 students with confirms. Last week, we pushed out over 1,000, over the last 2 weeks, we pushed out over 1,000 names on the wait list. And we're anticipating in the next few days, we're going to see some pretty strong results based on that action. We also sent to the system campuses over 1,000 names on the wait list over the last week. So that should also help their situation. So all told, we're down about 10%. And of course that varies, as I'm sure you know, by geography as well, where we're a bit more down with international, and we're actually doing a bit better in terms of the decrease with Minnesota residents and reciprocity.
Okay. Is that good clarification for you, Regent Shu? That's what I thought I saw. Or is your 2,200 number? I wasn't sure where that came from.
Well, 2,200 is just was like 6,200 minus whatever it is, 40. I see. 4,000. But my question, I'd like to confirm what you just said, because it's not in your slide. You talked about pushing out over 1,000 names to system campuses, but you also, I think, just said you pushed out 100 or 1,000 admits to the current waiting list that we have now, right?
Correct. So for Twin Cities students, or for Twin Cities admissions, we pushed out, actually over 2 weeks, we pushed out about 550, actually 600, another 500. And then we also sent to the system campuses off that wait list 1,000 names, different names.
Mr. Chair,
yeah, just one last one, Regent Shu.
So how many more students are on the waiting list for the Twin Cities right now?
Regent Shu, I'd have to go and check with admissions what's actually left on the wait list now, because they're actually this week, as we speak, pulling more names off the wait list for the Twin Cities admission as well.
Regent Shu, we'll come back to you. I think everyone understands the importance of these numbers, and we'll update you as we get more data on this. In the interest of keeping us moving here, I'm going to move on to Regent Her. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. I have a question for Vice Provost McMaster. With regards to enrollment at the other campuses, I am kind of concerned about the Crookston and Morris campus, which is really reliant on residential. So what are some best worst case scenarios for those two campuses?
Vice Provost McMaster.
So Chair Powell and Regent Her, I don't want to speak too much for the system campuses, because I think it's really their chancellors that eventually have to chime in. But Crookston actually is looking quite good this year. They're up on confirms over last year, and so at this point in time, they're looking as though they're in pretty good shape with about 2 weeks to go. Actually, 6 weeks to go, because they pushed their confirmed date out to June 1st. With Morris, we had a note from Morris, and they also pushed their confirmed date out to June 1st. They tend to receive a larger number of confirms through the month of May. They actually continue to take confirms there. So I think Morris actually over the next month will probably increase that number. They're very active with all of their recruitment activities. We had a note on everything they're doing, the outreach, the phone calls, the communication. So for Crookston, I think they're doing well. For Morris, I think we still have another month and a half to really see how that picture shapes up.
Okay, Regent Her, follow up? No, okay. Regent Davenport.
Fine.
Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Powell. First, I appreciate the thoughtful and practical approach to enrollment planning. and especially some of the discussion on the e-learning platforms. And in the packet, I just want to express support for the professional development for the faculty and the delivery of that online. I also want to express support for staying the course on student success. We do achieve four-year graduation rates and reduce student debt. I think that's very important. And whether or not we use the ACT, you can't just, I don't think, switch it on or off. We have to have something in place. And I think, you know, how do we look at some kind of system of predictive analytics to replace that ATC score to the extent that we have them and can utilize that. And of course, that's going to vary by campus and by program. But we need to be cautious about that because I don't know that we have the capacity to ramp up the developmental pieces that might be needed if we just throw it out altogether. So I'd encourage us to look at other predictive analytics if we're going that route. And apply those as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Davenport. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Provost. I don't know if you've had a chance to even unpack your bag yet, but welcome to Minnesota and the Twin Cities. You know, I am concerned about the discussion of fundamentally changing the way that we've improved and built the university over the last 20 years. That's been done through a lot of work, a lot of analysis, and it's resulted in a much higher graduation rate. It's resulted in lower student debt. It's driven, I think, a stronger faculty, and ultimately it has affected our research standing around the country. I think they're all interconnected. And so to make any long-term decisions based on one incident, I think is concerning. I would give the staff the flexibility to do what we need to do this year, but we have not finished our strategic plan. That got waylaid. We don't have a strategic plan. We need to revisit the maroon and gold objectives. So all that needs to take place before we look at any more significant change. I was going to ask Vice Provost McMaster whether there's an opportunity this year to actually increase the online component to increase the class size through, can we leverage the online platform in a way that creates more net revenue? I know you're looking at that modeling, but do you have any sense of whether we could, by reaching down into the pool of applicants, actually increase the number for this year than what we would have had last year in the Twin Cities?
Vice Provost McMaster. Oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Vice Provost McMaster.
Chair Powell and Regent Beeson, members of the board, I think I'll make a brief comment on that and then let Provost Croson also chime in on this one. I don't think so. I think in terms of the way we're looking at the class, looking at the wait list, we're gonna work very hard to land this class and bring in 6,000 or so students. And so I don't think dipping down into that with the opportunity for more online options will really help. In fact, we hear from a number of students that they really want to be back in the classroom this fall. They're anxious not to be online. So that would be my comment on that. Is I don't think that would be a direction to go right now, but maybe Provost Croson wants to add to that.
Provost Croson, would you like to add in?
Sure. So I agree with Vice Provost McMaster on the admissions. That said, I think once one develops and delivers high quality online education, those skills and talents and modules might be repurposed for other purposes, right? So it may be that there's professional training that individuals need. There may be other kinds of programs that we can explore that could be delivered because of the investments we made in this summer, and if we have to, in this over the fall. And so I do think that there are potential revenue streams, but I don't feel like it's simply increasing the number of undergrads is necessarily the right way to benefit from those streams.
All right. Thank you, Provost Hanson. Regent Beeson, did you have additional questions?
Well, I just had a follow-up comment, Regent Powell and colleagues, that, we don't know what the impact of the coronavirus is going to be on higher education. There's going to be changes. It's going to thin out the industry probably. But I would just urge all of us to sort of understand and keep in mind that we are on the high ground of universities. We've got a great brand. We've got a strong balance sheet. We're going to be able to withstand whatever this sort of brings us in the immediate term and the long term, and to not sort of lurch into an immediate sort of 180-degree change in how we're doing business. I think it's very risky to make long-term decisions for at the same time, I appreciate the flexibility to get this class filled up and do what we need to do to get on with business.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Regent Beeson. Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Chair Powell. I'm gonna give you some thoughts I have. They may be true or they may be untrue, but they're thoughts about maybe where we're going here. It's kind of nice to go last, actually, because I learned some things. One of the things that I thought was actually a really good trend for demand, I think I heard Vice Provost McMaster say completed applications were up from 34 to 36,000 or 2,000, which is a 6% increase. I think that's all. It was probably all pre-pandemic, but it was a good indication that our trend for demand at the University of Minnesota is good. I think I also heard him say that students wait longer and longer to make up their mind what acceptance or which college they're going to accept. So it's not unusual that we'll be about 500 students behind for the system. I think that's part of that. One of the things that I have just thought about is, and I will also concur where I have heard, just like Vice Provost McMaster, a lot of students are missing the campus. There's a lot of students missing the campus. Some like online, but there's both. So I put some of that information all together. I think students aged like 17 to 23 right now are trying to figure out what they want to do next fall. I don't think they all know what they want to do next fall. Even if they're enrolled in college now, they may not want to go if it's online. They may want to come back to campus. Some students may say, oh, I enjoy online more. But I look at the students that are college students and want the education, want that diploma at some point in time. If they don't attend college next year, talk about gap years or whatever, I think their options are fairly limited. We've got 22 million Americans out of work. I don't think it's going to be real easy for them just to go to work. And some of them want to travel in their gap year. I'm not so sure that's going to be a great option for them either. So we may see, also coupling that with, we live in like the Twin Cities campus. I live in God's country out in rural Minnesota, but the Twin Cities campus is in the 15th largest metropolitan area, largest in the country. I think as we get closer and closer to fall, we may see more students all of a sudden saying, I want to go to college. Does that offer still stand for me? So those are just some of my thoughts. We're in a time where everything is, we've got to be flexible because we don't know exactly what's happening. But I think we might see more and more students say, I need to go to campus, need to go to college, and I need to stay closer to home. And so it might drive enrollment if we have positions. I guess that's my take on it. And I don't know if Vice Provost McMaster wants to comment or not and tell me I'm partly correct, all correct, or incorrect.
Thank you, Regent Anderson. Provost Hanson, which is it for Regent Anderson? He gave you three choices.
Mostly correct. Can I go with that one? We are indeed optimistic about this class, both in terms of the number and in terms of the quality of the students. And as we all know, Minnesota as a state is a net exporter of college students. And so if indeed it turns out that people want to stay closer to home, we should be benefited from that. But we understand that there's a lot of uncertainty, and making decisions in a, especially for these students in a time of uncertainty is challenging. And so we want to be as flexible as we can and as welcoming as we can.
All right, thank you, Provost Hannon, and thank you, Regent Anderson. So I'll just conclude with a few comments. First of all, I want to thank the board for very, very good questions, very good comments. I think they're provocative, and I'm sure the president and provost and vice provost, these are good food for thought here. And I don't want to try to add to all the good commentary. I will just say that the problem that sort of vexes and concerns me the most is, what is the fall term going to look like? And is it the hybrid, or is it totally online? And I have my own views on where we might want to land, but I think the board will start to feel much better, Provost Hanson, as we really wrestle to the ground exactly what it's going to look like and what we're going to do to make it be effective. I know that it's up in the air now. I know you're working very hard on it, but we just have to know what it's going to be and how we're going to deliver the goods here and make it a really good experience. And the sooner, in my view, the better. It would help to have a go, no go. By when do we need to decide? I think once we know what we're going to aim at, that will that focus will be helpful to all of us, you and the board. All right. So thanks to everyone for a very good discussion. We're going to turn now. I don't think there's anyone else. Okay. I think there's one more. Regent McMillan would like to speak, I believe.
Thank you, Chair Powell. I passed earlier, and in listening to the conversation, I've got one question for Vice Provost McMaster. And my guess is that while you talk roughly of landing a class of 6,000, I'm assuming, and maybe it's not a good assumption, but that you're going to target a bigger class than that in the hopes that knowing we're going to have probably more students doing things other than what they may tell us they're going to do now. You'll overshoot in terms of what you're after there and risk the potential that everybody shows up. And I'm not trying to micromanage, because I don't know your business like you do for sure. But as I think about that, it seems like a safer year than normal to try to go after a bigger class, knowing you're going to have a lot of things that wouldn't happen in a normal year happen, and probably end up with something short of what you are shooting for. Is that a fair way to think about this, Vice Provost McMaster, or are you concerned that everybody that gets admitted will actually show up and you don't want to try to overshoot?
Chair Powell and Regent McMillan, members of the board, this is a year where we are not worried about overbooking the flight.
Got it.
And certainly when we talk about 6,000, that is after summer melt. What happens is our models actually accommodate for what would be a traditional summer melt, which would be about 5%. And we're going to have to pad that a bit this year because of the uncertainty. But to your point, the 6,000 would be after the summer melt in our models.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Regent McMillan. All right. Thank you, everybody. I think that is everyone who has wanted to speak has spoken. So we're gonna move on now to the third item. And thank you again all for that discussion. Now the administration is going to review assumptions and options for the fiscal year 2021 budget. This review isn't a typical component of our operating budget process, but it's very important given the financial impact that the pandemic has had and is going to have on the university. So here's what we're going to do. President Gable, Senior Vice President Burnett, and Associate Vice President Tonneson are going to give us some additional context on the impact of the pandemic on our operating budget. They're also going to update on the university's allocation from the Federal CARES Act. They will also discuss their preliminary assessment of financial stringency and fiscal emergency as they're outlined in board policy. This item also includes a formal review of a proposal for a system-wide tuition freeze for the upcoming academic year. And this proposal is before us for review today with action at a future meeting. So President Gable, would you like to lead us off, please?
Thank you, Chair Powell. So the discussion you're about to hear is a follow-on to our discussion from April 7th, where we continue to work through budget scenarios in this unusual time. Senior Vice President Burnett and Associate Vice President Tonson will be building upon the framework that we presented to you last time around best, middle, and worst, so that we can anchor into an architecture from which we can make the decisions that we need to make going forward. We anticipate previewing these recommendations for you today so that we can have additional discussion in the context of the entire budget proposal at the May meeting with action in June. In particular, and as a part of our recommended fiscal year 21 operating budget, the administration will be recommending and bringing to you formally today a tuition freeze resolution for all rates across the system for the 2020-2021 academic year. And this tuition freeze is an assumption in all of the projections that you'll be hearing about momentarily. There are 3 exceptions: dentistry, 3 masters in the College of Science and Engineering, and that's specifically a master's in the management of technology, a master's in security technology, and a master's in medical device innovation. And then the medical school tuition. Those are accepted from the tuition freeze proposal. Otherwise, it is across the board. And we make this proposal, including the exceptions, based on demand, market comparisons, service to our students, and as an anchor for us to be able to do planning so that we can move forward in a way that reflects the intersection of all those considerations. The timing of the tuition freeze decision is important for marketing purposes for exactly the reasons that framed a lot of the questions that you all were posing to Provost Croson and Vice Provost McMaster. The sooner we can tell our students that this is our plan, the better. And May 1st is their commitment deadline. So there is some, speaking of urgency, urgency here. I will turn over the bulk of the conversation to Senior Vice President Burnett and Vice President Tonson to provide an overview of our current resource capacity and generation, revenue sources, savings, which have been significant up to this point and continue, the CARES Act, which has come on board since the last time we spoke, and other important fiscal steps to consider in addressing the challenges posed by this pandemic. But before I do that, I want to take this moment to extend my thanks to the faculty, not only for the work they've done, which I've acknowledged already, but for their proactive efforts to be a partner in the shared governance efforts necessary in order for the institution to move forward effectively, to respond, but also to recover, including their consideration of a temporary reduction in faculty compensation as one part of the response, and in recognition of a potential future discussion related to stringency as permitted under the Regents policy on faculty tenure. At Thursday's Faculty Senate meeting, as you know, considerations around this will be discussed. But at this time, Mr. Chairman, I would like to welcome Senior Vice President Burnett and VP Tonson to the discussion.
All right, thank you. Senior Vice President Burnett and Vice President Tonson, over to you.
Good morning, Chair Powell, and thank you, and good morning, members. We are pleased to update you on our fiscal planning for fiscal year 21 and how our work is tying directly to the scenarios just described by Provost Croson and as well the system chancellors. AVB Tonson and I will be available for clarifications and questions after I work through this short presentation with your permission. Please know that our approach to these challenges is grounded, in as much as President Gable just noted, in the spirit and history of strong shared governance with our internal constituencies, as well as a keen respect for the governance role of the Board of Regents. Slide, please. So the three possible scenarios that we are working through tie directly to what you just heard in the prior presentation, whereas the base budget is also represented by the best case scenario, where our extended status and operation continues through, and as we are planning, summer is completely online. The moderate contingency, or contingency one, is some sort of a hybrid opening, extended status of reduced operations through October of 20, but beginning some in-person teaching in the middle of the semester, fall semester. And then contingency two is, what does it look like if we really have extended reduced status through the remainder of this calendar year and don't return to normal operations until the spring 21 semester, which would be in January of next year. This is the way in which we're putting the budget together to bring to the Board of Regents for its consideration and discussion in May. Slide, please. The key elements of our budget includes the President's recommendation for a tuition freeze, as she just discussed, on the vast majority of new and continuing students, reflecting the real challenges our families and students face in these unprecedented times. We are also recommending a 0% salary pool for all staff and faculty except those covered by existing labor agreements. A hiring freeze is underway and being monitored by senior leaders for any exceptions. And that is already beginning to help us in this effort to save revenues needed to respond to this pandemic. We are working on required internal budget cuts already to put this budget together, and we're working on additional scenarios, as scenario 1 and 2 talk about. And these two contingency plans will be laid out here in the next 2 slides. Slide, please. So for each contingency plan, what we will include is what are those enrollment assumptions. And that's not just for the Twin Cities campus, that's for all 5 campuses. What are the estimated tuition revenue reductions as compared to base budget? So what are our estimates if we are not able to open normal operations in September of this year? What are those tuition revenue reductions estimated at? What other revenue reductions will be affected, not just the tuition and fee piece? Again, recurring spending cut targets communicated to units will have to be elevated to respond to an anticipated drop in revenue. And we have to continue to develop plans for institutional level changes for expenditure savings. And then we will define these conditions, a set of conditions under which we would move to the implementation of these contingency plans, as you, Chair Powell, just noted about when would we actually say we're moving to contingency 1 or contingency 2. I think we're still working on when that target would be, but I think that by the time we bring these budgets to you, we would lay out what those sets of conditions or timing would look like. Slide, please. So to sum up what has been said now multiple times, the President does recommend a system-wide tuition freeze in FY21. And as she noted, these are the exceptions, and this would affect all undergraduate and the majority of graduate and professional rates on all 5 campuses. Slide, please. Other considerations I was asked to brief the board on today. We do and are making sure that our resource capacity and generation and our ability to stay being able to make our payroll and do those things that many of you have mentioned in earlier in today's meeting. We are staying very mindful of that. Our Office of Investments and Banking, my staff, we continue to make sure that we are talking with the state of Minnesota, that we're looking at different ways to maintain our resource capacity and generation. And we'll have more details on this when we bring you to the board in May, the first look at the FY21 budget with these contingencies. Secondly, I was asked to talk about financial stringency, and I know that the board has been presented with a summary of those that sit in the faculty tenure code for the University of Minnesota. And I do think that there's already a discussion underway, and I applaud as well the leaders of our faculty consultative committee and our shared governance model, that they recognize the challenges that this university faces, and they're taking the first steps and even communicating that with the Board of Regents to have these discussions about whether we should think about bringing financial stringency where it specifically talks about postponing compensation increases or perhaps taking a temporary pay reduction across the faculty. I do think that we are in the times where that has to be seriously considered. I think that is in contrast to the fiscal emergency piece of the faculty tenure code, which at the heart of it talks about where the survival of the institution is threatened. And candidly, as I've said prior and will commit to today, I do not believe that that is a place where the university finds itself today. Could we be there one day? Possibly, but I don't think, given what we know today, given the information you just heard from Vice Provost McMaster and Provost Croson about where we sit with enrollment, the other things that are being considered in the responses that this university is taking proactively, I do not believe that the time is here where we need to consider that action at this time. And finally, the CARES Act, the Federal CARES Act, which was Congress's reaction to this pandemic, allocated about $14 billion to higher education across the nation into several buckets. The U.S. Department of Education announced how they were going to allocate that. It was allocated 75% on our share of Pell students, Pell eligible students, and then 25% just on the number of students we have. And so the University of Minnesota system, all 5 campuses, was allocated $36 million. And what the CARES Act details is that 50%, at least 50% of that money has to be directed to assist students in helping them with challenges faced by the pandemic. And as President Gable noted, a number of our peers we're in discussions with, and we're working on models of how do we distribute this. I will tell you that each of our 4 of our 5 campuses were actually called out in the 36 million. So the distribution was made to schools based on accredited status. And since the Rochester campus is accredited with the Twin Cities, their money was included with the Twin Cities allotment. But Morris and Duluth and Crookston each got individual amounts separate from the Twin Cities. But when you add them all up, it's about $36 million. And just one other note to note, online students were exempted from being counted in that. So that really kind of hit Crookston. Unfortunately hit Crookston when you consider that about 50% of their students are online. So what I would say to you is we continue to look at this, and I'll emphasize one point that President Gable made earlier today with respect to employment. If we accept these federal funds, and the first 18 million of the 36 million is available for us to put in our submission, we have to explain in detail actions and decisions related to efforts to continuously pay employees and contractors. The federal guidance doesn't provide any standards for what constitutes the greatest extent practicable, but this is this balance that we're making in trying to maintain our employment, at least with respect to being able to accept these federal funds and put them to work for our students and our institutions, but also understand that we are going to have to make some difficult, challenging calls to maintain the institution's short-term and long-term viability. So with that, Mr. Chairman, the next slide is simply what we normally do when we bring you tuition rates is the resolution that you would be asked to vote on at some point that would do the freeze recommended by the president and the administration on the tuition. And with that, Associate Vice President Tonneson and I are happy to answer any questions you may have today on this piece of your agenda. Thank you.
Okay. Why don't we go to questions and comments? And I'd like to start at the end here with Regent Swigum to lead us off.
Thank you for the summary that you gave us. I think it was thorough at this time, understanding that we don't know what contingency we're under, what scenario we're under. It's very challenging times financially. You spoke about stringency as opposed to having a more emergency situation, emergency powers. And I tend to agree with you. I think that our faculty has led quite well. FCC has led quite well. the financial stress, we're certainly under financial stress, but I think it's manageable. We earlier talked about enrollment projections, which to me show promise. We know that our reserves are strong. Our income losses are certainly there, but I think they're manageable. To me, that seems to mean stringency measures are prudent, and that we probably do not need emergency powers at this time. And I think it's important for us to all recognize and note that our good faculty, has really, I'm thankful for their leadership to offer up, to step up, and to help in this situation. They're the heart of the university, and taking that lead at the university is an important opportunity for all of us to be good stewards at the U. And the faculty with the FCC action, or at least their comments, have really taken the lead, and I think we need to follow with that lead, work together, and I just echo and strongly state the stringency situation we're in seems to be appropriate at this time today. That's the only comment I would have regarding Brian's presentation, Mr. Chairman.
All right, we'll move on to Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Thank you, Senior Vice President Burnett and Associate Vice President Tonneson. I look forward to the budget that you're going to be rolling out. I just hope during these times that we're looking at more specifics in general, things like I mentioned before. What's going to be in business, I call it cash flow. And we're looking out a few months, 6 months like that, and what can be an example, how often it goes to the idea of when would an example of a fiscal emergency or urgent approval be required? Can't think of one right now where we couldn't get together as a board. When would that be? Can you give me an example?
Senior Vice President Burnett, can you respond?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'll do my very best to Regent Simonson. I would submit to you, we're going to do all we can not to get there, but some things are outside our control. We're going to plan effectively. We've managed this institution, I would submit to you, very conservatively and thoughtfully. We have senior leaders who have weathered other financial crises, maybe not to the extent of this one. And what I would share with you is, there's no question we're going to be bringing you the hard decisions, like freezing salaries, other things that we're going to be bringing to you. But when you look at the definition in the tenure code, in the University of Minnesota's tenure code about financial emergency, where it says that the institution, its livelihood is threatened, that's going to be a significant set of different circumstances. Can't say it wouldn't happen, but right now, knowing what we know, seeing the strong demand for our programs, knowing the financial reserves we have, knowing the commitment the state of Minnesota has made to this university, I can't predict when it would get there. Now, if this economy does not pick back up, and we may be talking about that in 12 or 18 months, but at this point in time, I don't think that's a scenario we face, and I don't think it's one we need to bring you a plan for at this time.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Regent Simonson. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this is a helpful conversation. I am in agreement based on what we have had presented to us and based on what we have seen generally, that that the current path discussing a stringency model is more appropriate. I don't see that the emergency standard has been met yet, but of course, as has been pointed out by previous speakers, we don't know all that will be coming our way, and need to be aware of that tool if necessary, and hope none of us hopes that we end up in that situation. The one comment that I'll sort of pile on here is that it would be so helpful, and of course this administration has been moving with deliberate speed to bring us to a strategic plan. It would be really helpful, and this is one of the reasons why you should always have a strategic plan in place and start preparing to replace the strategic plan when it runs its course, so that you always have one in place. It would be very helpful if we had a strategic plan adopted by this board to help guide some of the conversations that we're having about allocating these scarce resources in this retraction environment as opposed to a growth environment. And that leads into the comment that what we're doing now actually will have a pretty strong impact on, I mean, this is sort of a kind of a precursor to a strategic approach for the institution. Where we make investments, what we preserve versus what we cut, will have a lot to say about what the strategic direction of the university will be in the coming years. And so that's one of the reasons why I want to make sure that the president and the board are really in close contact, and that, you know, we don't end up with what's in the past been described as the fully baked pie before the board has an opportunity to evaluate and weigh in on what's coming forward. I would also add the last comment that I hope this is not an iterative process. I hope that this is really a holistic process. In times past, 91 was a period where we were facing, you could certainly describe it as stringency, because we were having substantial cuts on an annual basis from the legislative support, which was a larger percentage, and we relied more heavily on it than we have in recent years. And in that process, in the restructuring and reallocation, which ultimately resulted in closing programs and closing a campus, it was really a combination of determining where we could do cuts sort of across the board and still maintain functionality and excellence, and where there were times where you have to look and say, this particular offering is not a priority within the overall strategic direction of the institution. We're kind of coming at this without having that capacity, and so I just want to be very mindful that this isn't, you know, necessarily just nibbling around the edges, that there may be some times where we really need to say, with the scarce resources, here's where our priorities are and where we're going to continue to support investment, and other places maybe not. But ultimately, you know, as we go through this, it's going to lead us into that later conversation on the strategic plan, and I just would hope that the president and the board stay in close contact on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. President Gable, with regard to Regent Rocha's comments, good comments on strategic plan, could you maybe just give us your intentions as regards to the strategic plan, you know, activity and timetable?
Yes, thank you, Chair Powell and Regent Rocha. You know, the show goes on. The show must go on, and it goes on. We are still doing the strategic plan consultation. We are on schedule to report on that consultation at the May regularly scheduled board meeting, which will include the consultation that we've done with the campuses and also with several of our representative groups on the action items that we discussed while on retreat in Duluth. The Academic and Research Working Group has been charged accordingly. Even though the plan itself isn't approved, they have been asked to emphasize the mentor sections areas. They have been charged with student success. You may recall that exploring alternative modalities has already been discussed with this board as a cornerstone component of the strategic plan. The fiscal and operational working group has the goals of the strategic plan as part of their charge. Some of those action items may wait for obvious reasons, but the components that are, so I would say that given that the strategic plan has not been approved by the board, and we certainly don't want to get ahead of the board for exactly the reasons that you described, no fully baked pies, it is informing our process so that in the hope that the strategic plan that we've been discussing for this year comes forward for your review and ultimately action, that this all makes sense and ties together. Thank you.
Thank you, President Gable. So the show's going to go on. Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Picking up on President Gable's show goes on comment, I'm very pleased to hear that you're trying your best to keep that on schedule despite a detour isn't even the right word, using a roadmap analogy, kind of a complete reroute, and a highly circuitous route forward with everything coming at you with COVID. So that's great, because that is the right context for many of the bigger picture topics that have come up and been, parsed about in this conversation today, whether they're long-term entrance standards, all those kind of things. So that's great. I'm not quite sure how you keep it all going, but I'm very pleased to hear that you're doing your best to do so. I don't have any further comments on the financial situation as it sits today. I appreciate the added and more dire scenario modeling that's here. You've moved towards the likelihood that things could get worse rather than better, which I think is the right way to model this. There's probably an even more dire set of assumptions that I'm sure somebody has built up already, and I don't think we need to formally model those just yet, but being ready to go and ready to engage in that is important. And now I would turn to Senior Vice President Burnett again and pick up on a question I asked at the end of, or during the last session we had around liquidity. And I believe he touched on this in his remarks, but just like a little more certainty there, perhaps a more concrete example or two that he and the Treasury function at the university continue to be able to access capital markets, and that nothing's changed since the last time we talked about the university's opportunity to do so, and to do so on favorable terms. So if you could address that, Senior Vice President Burnett, that would be my only question at this time.
Senior Vice President Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Regent McMillan, to your question, yes, we continue to make sure that we have the liquidity we need within our temporary investment pool, commonly known as TIP. We've expanded the amount of liquidity there to make sure that we have the funds necessary as banking has been turned upside down, turmoil across the country. Markets are in a turmoil. The best example I can give you and give this board since we met last was we roll commercial paper. The commercial paper we issue that the board authorized us to do, which funds our construction projects, investors buy that, and we just rolled some that came due for 43 basis points, or 0.43% for 30 days, around 10 million. And Fortune 500 companies are right now paying 6 to 7%, or 6 to 700 basis points to sell their commercial paper on the market. So at least right now, the markets are bullish on us. The banks are interested in helping us if we need assistance. And at this point, we are doing all we can to proactively manage our liquidity, just as every business is doing in the United States at present. So thank you for the question.
All right, thank you, Senior Vice President Burnett, and I think also thanks to your Treasury function. It's been very high performing, not only in this case, but really going back several years, and it's created great value for the university. All right.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yes, thank you.
So I just want to we're going to probably go over time here, fellow regents, and, and that's okay, because this is obviously very important, but please, can I ask you to be as concise as possible so that we can continue to move through here. Regent Mayron.
I have a question as it relates to the tuition freeze, and that is, I understand today that proposal by the administration is up for review, not for decision. But our next meeting is, I believe, after the May 1 deadline, our next board meeting, when we would take it up as an action item. So my question for President Gable is, does that, the fact that we will not be in the normal course taking up the tuition proposal until after May 1, does that create any obstacles or challenges at your end in terms of what's being communicated to students and prospective students?
President Gable, is that question clear?
It's a fundamental, sorry, I'm not sure if I started speaking before I was unmuted. Thank you for the question. It's a fundamental obstacle. There has been a discussion in the media about the remarks that I made last time, saying that this would be proposed, but we are in a market where we must be accurate now more than ever, although I'm not sure there was ever a time we didn't need to be accurate, but the desire for certainty is at its highest levels in this environment of uncertainty. And so timing is a challenge in how we're moving forward. The tuition freeze is for more than marketing to incoming freshmen. It's a recognition of the challenge that students are facing. It's a recognition of the competitive landscape. It's the reason we are proposing it is because we believe it is the right thing to do and the right way to intersect between those two notable concerns. It would be nice if we could overcome this barrier.
Regent Mayron, would you like to request that this review item be considered for review and action today?
If that's possible to do, I think that that's very important for us to take this up now. So much hinges on it, as opposed to waiting until our next regularly scheduled board meeting, which is set for a date after, I believe it's the 7th or 8th, or maybe it's the following week, I can't recall. But in any event, unless we're planning on another special board meeting between now and May 1, I think it's critical that we take up that issue at this before May 1.
Okay,
So
I think
if it's possible to move for action now, I'd be happy to make that motion. I don't know procedurally how that works, but I'm confident Executive Director Steves can advise us.
so. That was exactly going to be my go-to spot here next, Regent Mayron. There is a process, and Mr. Steves, if you can just outline for the board how we approach this sort of request.
Mr. Chair, in a case like this, an item that is up for review on the board's agenda, any regent may ask that it be moved to a review action item. And as long as there's not objection from any other regent, then the board may proceed to go ahead and vote on that item in today's meeting. That the objection does not mean that they vote no on it. The objection simply would be to whether or not a vote is held. The regents would still be able to vote yes or no on the question.
So you could approve bringing it for review action and then vote against it as a motion.
That's correct.
Okay. So given that we have this question, and I do think there is some sentiment on the board, to move this to review action, is the next step to see if anyone would object to that now?
And do I need to make a motion first, and then we see if anyone has an objection, or is that how it works?
Mr. Chair,
Steves? Yeah.
A motion and a vote is not required. It is simply, board policy outlines it as a request, and then you would simply have to determine whether any other regents were objecting to that request. If no regents object, you can proceed to a vote.
Thank you. Then I would make that request.
All right. Before I ask if there are any objections, is there anyone who wants to comment on this request from Regent Mayron? I don't see any. Okay, Regent Hsu, I believe, would like to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Regent Mayron. Am I on? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
I was actually going to ask the same question, but I also think that there's some open-ended questions regarding these programs that I really don't know anything about. And, I would actually, I've said before, I would actually believe that maybe there's a reason to reduce tuition. Which is going a little bit further than freezing. And since we have some time between now and May 1st, I would prefer to have some time to consider that.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. I mean, my reading of this is that there's probably a pretty good board consensus that a freeze and that making this an action item today allows the president to market and communicate, that we've done that, very aggressively, and that could be helpful between now and May 1st. It doesn't preclude that the board would take up a conversation on additional action in May. I don't think we're going to be able to really have a thorough discussion on other action today, but I think we could approve the freeze today, and have a conversation on other actions later.
Support that. I would support that. Yes,
Okay.
I would support that. Thank you.
All right. Is there anybody who would object to this request from Regent Mayron? I'm not seeing any. Mr. Steves, are you seeing any? I see that Regent Beeson would like to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to say it would be helpful for the rest of us to be able to provide our input and view on this matter before we go into a sort of a quasi vote. I do support the tuition freeze, so if it's the will of the board to go ahead with it now, I will support that.
Well, I think all we're doing now is saying that we're willing to bring it up as a review action. We won't vote before hearing from everybody on the amended resolution, which would be review action. So there are others who want to speak now. Regent Rocha.
Mr. Chair, yeah, you headed off the first question, or the first, but I just want to verify that as I'm looking at my docket, what we're being asked to move to review action is the resolution that's on my page 38 of 52. Is that the one that starts with fiscal year 2021 system-wide undergraduate and graduate professional student professional tuition rates? Am I tracking properly?
Yes, Regent Rocha.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, thank you. Regent McMillan.
Thank you, Chair Powell. In light of the President's clear response about the need for this and the value of it in terms of filling our 2020 entering class, I fully support advancing from review with action later to taking review action today on the resolution.
All right. Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Powell. Just checking, are we varying from our comments to take this vote, or are we continuing with our comments and then taking a vote?
What I would like to do is continue with our comments. My reading of this now, and again, I will ask for our Secretary, Mr. Steves, to confirm. My reading is that no one has objected to moving this resolution as reread and clarified by Regent Rocha. No one is objecting to moving that from a review to a review action. And so given that no one has objected, it is now a review action resolution. And I'm going to continue through the list to see if there's any other comments on Senior Vice President Burnett's presentation. And once we've concluded that, we will then vote on the resolution.
Thank you.
Mr. Steves, am I in the right lane here?
Mr. Chair, you certainly are.
Okay, so we are now, the resolution is now review action. Is there anyone else who would like to comment on the financial overview that we've just seen from Senior Vice President Burnett?
Yes.
And who I heard, is that Regent Davenport who'd like to comment?
Are we going through the cycle? Is that where we're at?
Yeah,
I'll wait my turn.
Okay, let me see if I can find my cycle here. I've lost. I think I was at Regent McMillan. going in reverse alphabetical order. And
I was the last one to speak, and my question and my comments was only going to the issue of tuition. So I'm done speaking on the financial piece, and you can move on to whoever is the next person.
All right. And that next person is, sorry guys, let me get to my list here.
Mr. Chair, I believe Regent Kenyanya is next.
Yeah, thank you. Regent Kenyanya, it's over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I don't have comments that haven't been said. I think this is appropriate at the minimum. We can explore further action, but at an absolute minimum, I think this is appropriate. And I also support, I'm happy that we've moved it to review and action. I think with everything we've talked about, the central theme is uncertainty, and whatever certainty we can offer to students and their families, I think will go a long way. So thank you.
Thank you, Regent Kenyanya. Regent Mayron, do you have any other comments or questions? Thank you. Regent McMillan, you've had a chance to comment on the move to review action. Do you have other questions or comments on Senior Vice President Burnett's presentation?
No.
Okay, thank you. Regent Rocha, do you have other comments?
Mr. Chair, I think from my perspective, where I thought we were going is that you continued down toward A. So after Regent Kenyanya, you hit Regent Shu, Regent Her to the beginning of the alphabet, and then come back and speak to the resolution. Am I tracking that right? Because I feel like we kind of bounced back.
Yeah, yes, you're right, and I apologize for being a bit muddled here. I got 3 screens going, and I'm clearly losing one. So, Regent Shu, do you have additional comments on the Senior Vice President Burnett's presentation?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I was going to suggest that we have, for the budget, we have additional options, which would be online in the spring, either beginning online or fully online in the spring, since that's part of our fiscal year. And I do think if we listen to the experts that is a likely scenario, that there will be no vaccine by that time, and possibly no therapeutic, and possibly no herd immunity. So I would suggest that we add at least one other option, which would be an online for the spring. And then if you want to add 2 of them, it would be beginning online in the spring, and then residential face-to-face learning later in the spring.
Yeah.
In
other words, a plan for the full academic year.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then on in terms of this year's budget, I have a question of how we think we're going to end this year's budget, and regarding stringency versus emergency. I think we live in a world of trust but verify. I'm happy to listen to the presentation, but the presentation has no numbers in it. So in terms of stringency, I think that's a judgment call. It's subjective. Maybe we believe we're in stringency because we have plenty of cash, but we're going to wake up one day possibly, and we're not going to have that situation. So I'd like to explore where we are between stringency and emergency, and have some type of metric that we can use to understand how quickly we would be moving, if that would be the case, how quickly we'd be moving toward a fiscal emergency.
Okay.
So that if I could get some, it doesn't have to be today, but I really am looking for some numbers and a better idea of where we're at.
Okay, good. I think those are very, very clear and will require follow-up. Thank you. Regent Her.
Chair, my comments relate to Regent Shu with regards to progression of just us being diligent to our financial health of the university. So I am of the mind that the standard for, say, fiscal emergency or financial stringency right now is a quasi-objective, subjective measure. And from someone who takes, of course, all of us takes great responsibility for the financial health and stability of the organization, but just more confidence in that it's a more objective measure. So where are we with regards to our sense of comfortability or confidence in that definition? So it's something minor, but it's something it's on my mind right now as we're talking. So what kind of actions do we take along this progression of, we don't want to, on our way to going down a hole, I suppose, an analogy of that would be. So those are just my thoughts, and knowing what each step is and what are the actions that are appropriate at each step. Because what I'm seeing is students are asking the question, if the university is in good shape right now, and we feel like we can deal with whatever's coming up ahead, then why can't we have more than a tuition freeze? Why can't we have a tuition cut? And faculty will be saying, well, why do we need to cut our salaries when there's that pushback? So I think the more objective we can be in our standards, the better off we will be.
Thank you. Thank you, Regent Hurwitz. Some echoes there of Regent Shu's comment, and it is sort of it's subjective and step by step, and how will we know when we get there, and if we get there. And Senior Vice President Burnett, I don't know if you want to comment at all on Regent Hur's her question and comment, but it does have to do with that not fully defined territory between stringency and emergency.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to think about it a little bit more, and these questions and thoughts from the board are very helpful for us. I guess I would say it is left pretty subjective in the definitions, and for us to try and interpret and apply the situation we find ourselves in now. Again, I think when you take in the information that Provost Croson and Vice Provost McMaster laid out, we are cautiously optimistic about where the university is going, albeit a lot of the decisions about the economy and the state of Minnesota and how it sits are not in our hands, right? So I guess it is a difficult one to do, but we'll be bringing more levers and numbers in the May budget plan when we bring you the base plus the scenario 1 plus the scenario 2 as I described today, if that's helpful.
All right, thank you, Senior Vice President Burnett. So I think now, Regent Davenport, you've commented. Do you have additional comments or questions on the financial information presented today?
Well, I haven't had a chance to comment, but I've been waiting to, so thank you, Chair. I want to applaud the faculty for their demonstrated commitment to the university. And I'm on the side of agreeing it is not the time to declare financial emergency as we're discussing. This is exactly why we have reserves and have been building up the reserves for some years. It's time for this. And there's no crystal ball. And while we're dealing with the short term, I want to remind us that we still need to invest and not just cut to keep the university relevant in the long term. And so I'm glad to hear that the strategic plan is continuing. And then regarding tuition, what I'm interested in knowing, and if we have some kind of response before the vote, is have there been discussions with the legislature about this? And I say that because I see the finance picture in kind of a three-way model where we have a state investment, and the state is not going to be in a position for putting forward much investment, I would anticipate this next biennium. We have families' contribution, and then we have the university's reallocation or look at its own finances. So I'm wondering, have there been any discussions with the legislature? Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Davenport. President Gable, any dialogue with our representatives in the state legislature or the governor
Yes.
regarding support? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair Powell and Regent Davenport. Yes, a lot of discussion on multiple levels and with multiple touch points. The science side, the clinical care side, and the financial stability of the university as a whole as the three main pillars of our engagement with state government, both our elected officials and the commissioners, including Commissioner Olson, where you see a lot of that intersection, both in terms of state support and also in terms of how the state will channel the federal support that they're projected to receive for overall statewide stimulus. So multi-tiered and relatively constant communication and advocacy on behalf of the financial stability of the U and our willingness to meet them in the middle on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Davenport, any follow-up?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to Regent Herr's observation, we're going to have a real life example about how this policy of stringency and emergency really work. And I predict that it appears sort of wooden, and it's going to need its own work when we get through. I do support the stringency definition. I think for the reasons that have been stated. I want to make a comment about the strategic plan. You know, I was against sort of moving as quickly as we did after the president arrived because I didn't feel like she had been sufficiently grounded here before we started on that exercise. And I want to make sure we don't sort of jump into that process just to check a box. This disease will be here probably for 2 years. And the outcome of it in terms of higher ed is going to be out in that 2 to 3 year period. So let's just be mindful of that. I like the approach we've taken. April 7th, we got ahead of the matter in terms of we identified some cuts. We laid the table out here. I think that's good. I would be against sort of making other sort of rash cutting decisions until we've got a fully baked plan. And I want to give the staff the freedom and maybe depart from our normal May and June budget approval. The staff wants to come in with a budget plan in 2 weeks. I don't really think you're going to be ready for that. I mean, you got all the options, and in 2 weeks, I think it's unlikely you're going to be able to really get down to one. So I would prefer that we have another conversation in 2 weeks, but then have a special meeting later in May and really stretch this thing out as far as we can to make the longer we can wait, the better decision we're going to make. I know we can't wait until June 30th, the day before our new fiscal year, but let's not be held back by our own sort of customs. This is really something that is so different, and so I don't want you to spend so much time on the base plan, inordinate amount of time on the base plan if it's only got a 30% chance of occurring. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Mr. Steves, can you provide any, to Regent Beeson's commentary, can you provide us any, clarity or guidance on just sort of the budget kind of approval process timing, these requirements, or just board policy, or how much flexibility do we have there?
Mr. Chair, as Regent Beeson noted, the absolute deadline is that a budget must be adopted by June 30th because the new fiscal year starts July 1 and the board would need to have a budget in place for the beginning of that fiscal year. That said, the only other requirement that I think is hard and fast in board policy is that you need to review the budget at one meeting and take action at a subsequent meeting. You can't do the budget as a review action in one meeting. Other than that, you do have flexibility to use special meetings or other means to review that budget at one point in time and act on it in a subsequent time.
Okay. Thank you. I mean, my impression is President Gable and Senior Vice President Burnett that your teams are working really full steam ahead to be ready to bring the board, a first shot at that budget on May 7th. And you guys, Senior Vice President, why don't you comment? But my impression is you're going to hit that deadline, and we're going to have something very substantive to talk about on May 7th. May not be all the way to bright, but it's going to be pretty far along.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Regent Beeson and members. That is our goal. We are working very hard. Lots of folks pulling together, especially Associate Vice President Thompson and all the chief financial managers of our units. We will have something for you. What I would say is the bigger piece is, when do we decide to pull contingency one? And to Regent Beeson's point, you don't want to make that decision too early, meaning if things are starting to settle in and things might look like we have a chance at normal operations, we don't want to prevent our ability to bring students to campus, to put them in our dormitories if it's safe, all those things. And so, it's just about timing and when we would execute on the contingencies. And I think that's what we'd like to spend a lot of time on May 7th, 8th, talking to you about how we see that. And it'll be in a much more refined piece. And to one other point, I forgot for Regent Kenyana, the 200 senior leaders taking the pay cut that the president described saves $1 million between now and June 30th. And the 10 cabinet members for next year is about $300,000 in the next year's budget. Those are additional pieces. And I forgot, Regent Kenyana, my mistake about bringing that up in my presentation. I'm sorry.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Regent Beeson, for your question, and Senior Vice President Burnett. Let's move on now to Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Chair Powell. I've listened to all this. I'm a little bit confused, but I am going to talk about, I think we have the review action now of the tuition freeze, correct? That is
yes
on the table. Okay.
Yes.
I think it's pretty well universal with my colleagues that we want to freeze tuition, and I'm fine with that. I'm really fine with that. I think it may help us land the class, as we've heard from the provost, we've heard from the vice provost. And if it does help us land the class at a sooner date, we get some level of certainty of what we're going to be bringing in tuition revenue. And I think that's a good thing to have some level of certainty with all the unknowns. At the same time, I kind of agree with Regent Hsu and Regent Davenport that it's going to force us to look at expenses here soon, because if we know we're not raising tuition, we know that we can't be raising, expenses can't be raising. So also okay with, knowing we're going to have to look at the expenses, almost like Regent Beeson said, sometime we're going to have to get a handle on where we are. I think the staff will do a wonderful job. I think it'll come, as Regent Davenport said, maybe as a combination of reserves, cost reductions, possibly credit in the future. We don't know what we're going to need yet. So I think I'm okay with freezing the tuition today. And I think it puts us in the proper place to be in this situation where we have a little bit of certainty on some of the revenue pie, and we're going to have to force ourselves to look at expenses, and that's okay. So I am, I guess, affirmative with the motion on the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Regent Anderson. I believe one other Regent Hsu, would like has a second question or comment. Regent Hsu, please.
Yes, I just had a quick question for Senior Vice President Burnett. You just gave the savings. I just wondered, I haven't heard this from anywhere, but are there any savings associated with athletics in there, or is that not been determined yet? The voluntary.
Mr. Chairman.
Senior Vice President Burnett.
Regent Hsu, there are a number of athletic personnel that volunteered to be a part of that 200 group. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, and Regent Simonson would like the mic. Regent Simonson.
Yeah, just briefly, going back to budget assumptions, we talked about reduction in expenses, salary, wages, et cetera, layoffs, and the impact that this has on you employees and the staff. So going back to a previous question I had before, where does this conversation concerning the ability to obtain loans from their 401, which the CARES Act allows, but apparently requires board approval. Where is that question discussed?
Yeah, and is that, I think that's Senior Vice President Burnett. Do you have an answer there, or we have to follow up, or what's going on there?
Regent Simonson, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We need to follow up with you on that. We have looked into it during the course of this meeting. There may be some things we need the board to do that were new provisions in the CARES Act, but we were just working through that because of all the retirement plan changes and other things that we've been doing. So we'll get back to you on that.
Thank you.
All right. I don't see anyone else with a desire to speak, and hearing that there's no objection from the board on moving to review.
I would like to say something. I would like to say one thing. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I didn't see my hand up.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Trying to use
Regent Mayron. Yeah, Regent Mayron.
All right. Taking the comments by both Regent McMillan and also Regent Beeson in terms of when the budget comes to us, I think we need to give the administration the latitude if they believe they're going to be ready to propose a baked budget for us to review at the May 7th board meeting, and that's the appropriate date. That's fine. But also, if they feel there are so many moving parts here that they need more time, I do think the idea of using a special board meeting and other procedures to ultimately get to a budget before June 30th should be entertained. At the end of the day, we want to get it as right as we can with as many accurate inputs as possibly can be gotten. So I would like to suggest to the administration, if you think you need to present the budget to us in a different timing than we normally would get it, I think we should be open to that as regents to accommodate that.
Thank you, Regent Mayron. And what I heard from Senior Vice President Burnett is that they will be ready, and that they actually, and that is a review meeting, not an approve, and that they actually, need and want that, that meeting and that conversation with the board to review all of their assumptions. And so, look, if they need more time, we can talk about that, but it sounds like they're going to be ready. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just point of order. Are we now the resolution will be moved in front of us, and then we will speak to the resolution?
That's right.
Thank you.
So we are now we now have the budget freeze. That resolution is before us now for review and action. And so before we move on to discussion of that motion, I do need someone to move it.
Move the motion.
And is there a second? There is a motion and a second. So it's now been moved and seconded to approve the resolution related to 2021 system undergraduate and graduate professional tuition rates. And we will now move to a discussion of that resolution, and we will start off with Regent Mayron if she has any comments.
Well, for all the reasons that I wanted to bring it to an action item, I think it's imperative that we address this issue now. I'm in favor of the tuition freeze as proposed. I understand that there may be others who feel that we should re-examine whether some sort of tuition accommodation or freeze should be made as to the 3 groups that were exempted from this proposal, or in fact, whether we should look at something even greater than a tuition freeze. But I think the appropriate time to address those issues are as we see as we go through the budget review process and see all of the levers that are going to play into how we fiscally and responsibly carry the university forward. So I don't think it precludes us from having that discussion in future meetings, but I think at a minimum we should be adopting the proposal as currently before us, and I'm in favor of it.
Thank you, Regent Mayron. Regent McMillan.
Further, I've expressed my support for the freeze.
Okay, and just to, so that you can all be ready, I started the alphabet in the middle. Now we're at Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quickly, I will just associate with Regent Mayron's comments a moment ago as to the timing of this determination. I am in the camp that views that reduction in specific areas would be appropriate. Especially some of the system campuses where we can find ourselves a bit off market, and that would, in my view, would certainly warrant us taking a look at some reductions in those opportunities, as well as across the system. I would also associate with Regent Davenport's comments earlier about being strategic in how we invest, and to some extent, it's somewhat of an odd approach, but in this case, not cutting is a form of investing, and there may be some areas where we would find a basis to do that, to maintain that investment. I would then finally point out that even within this tuition freeze and potential cut as we go forward, we can mitigate the impact of that if we are diligent about filling all of our capacity with students who are in a position to take advantage of the university's offerings and succeed academically. So I think this is the right move for giving certainty to the population that we're not looking at a tuition increase in these areas. And the only uncertainty would be whether there is an even better opportunity for us to have an abatement of some sort, as has previously been mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm okay with this as long as we continue to review for further action down the road. I'm in favor of it.
Thank you, Regent Simonson. Regent Swigum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. The ideal is a vote, and that's very, very positive. Let me thank Regent Mayron for moving this resolution from review to action. I think that was a very wise decision. We as a board and the president now have the opportunity to act together, and that's really, really important, I think, is that we act together on this very positive, this very strong statement to our students and prospective students. And let's move ahead, Regents.
Thank you, Regent Swigum. Regent Anderson.
As I said before, I speak in favor of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do support this. A couple of other comments. The students are going to be getting grants, and that's a good thing. And that they need to get an income supplement from jobs that they're not going to have the summer and through the year. So that's a form of tuition reduction, if you will. That's sort of cash gift. I also would ask the foundation, every community and private foundation in this town is being asked to depart from their guidelines and give a larger amount of money than that which they have done before. And I can't think of, I'm sure those conversations are underway, but the amount of the dividend to the university and the way in which those monies are targeted, I think should be on the table in connection with the students' needs.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair. I am prepared to vote in support.
Thank you. Regent Herr. Regent Herr. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have a question for Senior Vice President Burnett with regards to the percentage of, say we have this tuition freeze, and I know that you're planning for next year's budget with regards to the percentage of the total pie. Would this be an increase or decrease? And what's the percentage, if you can just speak to the more of the fiscal note of the percentage of say grants, tuition that makes up the budget of the university? Would it be an increase or decrease, and how much?
Chairman?
Senior Vice President Burnett.
Regent Herr, thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I understand your question, I think the question that you're asking is, what does this move to freeze tuition, what does it mean financially? Okay.
Yes.
So two things, and I'm pleased that Regent Davenport brought up the legislature. When they gave us our biennial budget last year, they had requested that the regions not raise in-state tuition greater than 3% each of the next 2 biennia. Last year, this board voted for 2%, and we were modeling no higher than 2%. Had we done that across the undergraduate and some of our other programs, it would have been about $25 million. So what this does is it takes about $25 million of new revenue out of next year's budget plan. Is just the simple answer to that question. Is costs would not go up by roughly about 25 million, because our tuition base approaches $1 billion across 67,000 students.
Regent Her, does that get it?
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Regent Hsu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask President Gable a question about the three areas where we're not going to freeze. Now, that by definition means we're going to increase. And so what are we talking about in terms of the increase there? How did that come about? Since I think it was a surprise to at least me, maybe everybody, that there would be some exceptions to this since the last time we discussed it. So if you could help me out by explaining that, that would be terrific.
President Gable.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regent Hsu, it's the medical school, the dental school, and 3 specific programs in the master's level programs in the College of Engineering. Medical and dental school, if I'm not mistaken, and I will send a follow-up memo if memory doesn't serve, but my understanding is we set tuition now for tuition that would commence in a year, that the cycle of their tuition increases has a lag because of how their admissions work. So if we don't approve a tuition increase now, we're actually freezing tuition for 2 years. And that would be very detrimental to their budgeting, and is also not indicated by the competitiveness of the market for positions in that program. The master's programs in engineering do not have that lag, but have tremendous expense associated with the delivery in terms of the technology and teaching loads, and extremely high demand, and so have asked to be excluded for those reasons. Thank you.
Regent Hsu.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, Madam President. That's very helpful. I will support this, but I do think that we may want to revisit based on what happens after May 1st, May 7th.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. Regent Kenyana.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a comment. There's been some interest in. Well, first, let me just start by saying I will support the resolution. I think it's necessary. If when we do have the conversation about further action, possibly reduction, as has been alluded to, I think just thinking about that very, very early on, I imagine, especially at certain system campuses, you can't reduce tuition without backfilling that in some way. I don't imagine some of those campuses some of our campuses can afford to lose that kind of revenue and not have essential support to maintain operation somewhat. But I am interested in hearing about that going forward. And then just a note, in just the way we've been talking about this, the freeze is not, we're not taking away revenue from the next budget year, because there was no increase ever passed. So I think just the way we're speaking about it assumes that there was an increase, and now we're undoing it. But just the way I think about it, tuition is what it is, and we can choose to increase or not increase. So just because words matter, I just like to point that we're not losing any additional revenue from the next budget year. We're just not adding it. But I will support the resolution. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And just in the interest of brevity, I strongly support this resolution and moving it from review to review and action. I think it will really equip President Gable to go out and sell this initiative hard. All right, I don't see anyone else with a desire to speak. And so, again, as you all know, since the meeting is being held electronically, we're required to record this as a roll call vote. And Mr. Steves will call the roll. And Mr. Steves, it might be helpful again just to briefly read the resolution before we call the roll.
Mr. Chair, this is the resolution that's contained in the board's docket with regard to freezing tuition for the coming academic year.
with the exceptions as just outlined by President Gable.
That's correct.
Correct. Okay, let's call the roll.
On that resolution, Regent Anderson.
Yes.
Regent Anderson votes yes. Regent Beeson.
Yes.
Regent Beeson votes yes. Regent Davenport.
Yes.
Regent Davenport votes yes. Regent Herr.
Yes.
Regent Herr votes yes. Regent Shu.
Yes.
Regent Shu votes yes. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Mayron.
Yes.
Regent Mayron votes yes. Regent McMillan.
Yes.
Regent McMillan votes yes. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Regent Powell.
Yes.
Chair Powell votes yes. Chair Powell, there are 12 in favor and 0 against.
All right, by a vote of 12-0, this motion passes. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to the next item, and this item also relates to the financial impact of the pandemic, but this time within our academic medical enterprise and its affiliated organization. Materials for this item include a resolution that is before us for review today. We will consider action on this item at a later meeting. Joining us for this discussion are Dean and Vice President Toller and Mr. Mitch, Chief Financial Officer of the Medical School and the University of Minnesota Physicians. So President Gable, would you like to introduce this item?
Thank you, Mr. I'm going to defer to Dean and Vice President Tolar to set this topic up for discussion.
All right, thank you. Dean Toller, Mr. Mitch, over to you.
Chair Powell, Vice Chair Swigum, President Gable, Regents, thank you for making time for this item. And let me start with saying that it's an honor and a gift to be able to serve this phenomenal institution in the time of peacetime and time of crisis equally. As we have seen, the same rigor has been applied to the normal operations as has been applied, perhaps with some touch of impatience at the time of the COVID-19 pandemic and economics, because equally we need to survive both of them. And it is also an honor to say that the University of Minnesota Physicians is a faculty practice of the medical school and is integral to university success and its reputation, its relevance, and it represents on a personal level the resilient, selfless, utterly exhausted, but always humane clinicians that you see on the front line of the COVID-19 hospitals, and equally to the ingenuity and industry of the researchers that brought this university to almost daily to national news on subject of protective equipment, ventilators, trials, treatments, and truly has been the focus of the solutions for COVID-19 seen nationally. So seen in this instability, I think it's important that we are here to report to the board the looming challenge economically for the practice and state that we may need your assistance in future. But for today, we are only asking for flexibility in the funds flow whereby the University of Minnesota Physicians and Medical School operate with each other. And I'd like to ask our CFO, Mitch, to describe the scenario. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. CFO Mitch, please, the floor is yours.
Chairman Powell and members of the Board of Regents. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my screen said you couldn't, so glad you know. I'll keep my comments brief, and I apologize if you hear a dog barking in the background. We picked up 2 puppies on Sunday, and one of them does not want to take a nap, so hopefully we can't hear him. Next slide, please. About 5 weeks ago, as the impact of the COVID virus was becoming obvious to our clinical operations. The finance team from UM Physicians and from the Fairview Health System got together to try to estimate what impact this was going to have on our revenues. You can see on screen, we made some assumptions. We made 3 separate scenarios. This was the most likely scenario that we came up with regarding the hospital census, the surgical procedures, clinic visits, and ancillary revenues. Turns out we were very wrong in 2 cases and pretty close in 2 others. If you were to look at the hospital census today, it actually is running at about 56% of capacity. Before the COVID virus, it was running over 90%, usually almost 100%. The clinic visits we thought would have a 70% decline, although they did dip initially. They've climbed back up to 60% because we are using video conferences and phone conferences for a lot of patient visits. The ASC procedures have dropped to almost 0 because most of those are elective, and under the governor's decree, we cannot do those procedures. And ancillary revenues, which follow pretty closely to surgical procedures, have also dropped significantly. So our initial assumption or estimate was that UMP's revenues would drop by about 40% to 45%, which is roughly $5 million per week. Next slide, please. In response to this estimate, UMP took some immediate actions. We reduced retirement contributions for physicians and staff down to 1%, which saves about $1.4 million on a biweekly basis. We eliminated business expense account funding for the last quarter of our fiscal year, which is about $200,000 savings every 2 weeks. And as you heard, President Gable initiated a request for leadership to voluntarily take salary reductions. Dr. Tolar extended that request to leaders within the health sciences. And the total of those voluntary reductions will be about $150,000 biweekly through the end of the fiscal year. Other actions that UMP considered but did not take yet would be to reduce physician salaries by 10 to 25%, which would save us about $2.5 million on a biweekly basis. Reduce staff salaries by 10 to 20%, which would save us about $2 million on a biweekly basis. And we're also scouring contracts and looking at other non-personnel expenses for opportunities to reduce those. So potentially we could be at about $6.2 million of cost reductions if we take those further actions that you see there. Next slide, please. We are also trying to take advantage of any state or federal support that is available. The state, as you know, had a $50 million pot of money that we could apply to. We did put in an application for $8.3 million. We received $350,000. We have been informed from the CMS that under the CARES Act, we will receive roughly $2 million based on our 2019 Medicare fee-for-service business. And we also will take advantage of the deferral opportunity for employer FICA taxes, which will save us from a cash basis, a cash flow basis, about $2 million through December 31st. That amount will have to be paid back in fiscal 21 and 22. So those 3 things combined will save us about $4 million overall. And remember that just for the month of April, we're expecting a loss of revenue of about $20 million. Next slide, please. And just to give you some feel for the financial interdependency of UM Physicians and the medical school, on an annual basis, historically, UM Physicians has transferred money into the medical school under 3 programs. One is the Dean's Tax, which virtually all medical schools levy on their clinical practice. That's about $11 million a year. The physicians voluntarily transfer about $21 million into the medical school to support academic programs. And then we also have about $78 million a year that comes over from physicians to the medical school to pay the salaries of medical school and university employees who do have responsibilities in the clinical enterprise as a portion of their appointment in the university. So in total, there's $110 million on an annual basis that comes into the medical school. And over the years, the dean's office, just the dean's office itself, has set aside almost $27 million from the dean's tax that comes in. So those are cash amounts available for the dean to use as he chooses. Next slide, please. And then finally, to give you some sense for what we're dealing with in terms of a cash drain, the initial revenue projections are actually fairly close to what we've experienced through Monday. We're experiencing about a 40% loss of revenue. We would like to avoid dropping below 30 days of cash on hand because if that happens, we may not be able to meet payroll. So if we took no action other than what we've done so far, we would hit that 30 days cash threshold by June 7th. If we reduce our expenses in half by about 2.5 million, we would hit the 30-day threshold on July 12th. If we reduce our expenses and then, as you'll hear from Dr. Tolar, have the ability to defer payments coming in from physicians for those clinical expenses that I described to the tune of $1.5 million a week, we would maintain our cash above the 30-day threshold until August 30th. And those are the comments I had prepared, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mitch, thank you. And I think are we now moving back, Dean Tolar, to you, or are we moving on to a discussion?
I'll just make a very short comment, Mr. Chair. Thank you for listening. I just want to iterate that we are only asking for authorizations to utilize the medical school clinical reserves to defer up to $5 million in the UMP clinical revenue for up to 12 months from the date that the transfers would have been made. This is in essence, paying with medical school funds for medical school work and doing this temporarily. And again, the focus there is that we can continue being relevant to the state and for the symbolic and moral reasons, remain the leaders to take the responsibility for the sickness of Minnesotans. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dean Tolar. Let me just ask one clarifying question. I mean, it appears that while the dip in revenue has been about what you expected, the expectation now is that as we learn and understand how to manage the COVID crisis, we're able to forecast better how that surgical revenue will recover. And that has moved us to a situation where we want to have flexibility. We want to have some options, which is causing you to seek this deferral, but that we are expecting these revenues to start to grow again.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you for asking this clarifying question. This is exactly, what we are focusing on. We call it a restore. This is not elective surgeries. These are people that have breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, neurological disorders, and have been waiting for month and a half without being able to be served. And the teams that I serve are leading the efforts in antibody testing and molecular testing that with the paired test will enable that restoration and that, as the president said very nicely, sunrise rather than light switch in picking up the surgical procedures. At the same time, we have nearly approached 80% of the virtual visits. This is unprecedented in the only way that I would use unprecedented, because this is unprecedented. This is something that we were talking about telemedicine for years. And then I have been humbled by the enormous industry of my teams that they were able to turn this around within days so that our patients are now served by telemedicine as we speak. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Toller. So you've all seen the presentation. Hopefully these clarifying comments are good. You understand the resolution, which is to defer payments to the medical school up to $5 million for up to 12 months just to help them manage liquidity. And with those opening comments, we'll start with your questions and comments. And this time we're going to begin with Regent Kenyana.
Oh, wow. Cut me off guard. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I think it makes sense. I'll be supporting it. I mean, certainly appreciative of UMP, the med school, and medical workers on the front lines. And I think if this is what's appropriate to ensure their solvency and ensure that they can continue serving the university and the state and the public, then I think it's the action we should take. But I have no questions at the time.
Thank you, Regent Kenyana. Now we'll turn to Regent Hsu, and after Regent Hsu, it will be Regent Her. So Regent Hsu, any questions or comments on the resolution and the presentation?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. We generally don't get UMP financials like this. At least I can't recall getting any since maybe we got it once during the discussions with Fairview, but I would like to clarify one question, and I'm looking at the thing. We're only talking $5 million, right? Up to $5 million, is that correct?
Mr. Mitch.
Yes, excuse me, yes, Regent Hsu, that is correct.
Okay, so it's not 5 million a month for 12 months. It's 5 million for 12 months, right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. And then on the other, just like on the other one, this is up for review today, or should we be doing a review action?
It is for review today, and Dr. Toller can comment. My understanding is that this one doesn't have quite the time sensitivity that the previous one did, and a review today and action at the next meeting is the plan.
Mr. Chair, Regent Hsu, yes, that's correct. We are asking for a nearly symbolic gesture of the university support. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Regent Hsu?
Yeah, so basically, there's no need to take action on this today. So that was my other question. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Her.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dean Toller. I just first want to thank you so much, and the medical health workers and the frontline workers. And it seems to me that it's kind of that you all are doing the work and then also suffering this. So I know that at a lot of hospitals and medical settings that this is everyone is facing this type of financial, that you're asked to do the service, but then at the same time you're suffering the financial consequences. So I want to thank you and all your colleagues for the great work that you're doing, the service that you're doing for the nations and its people right now. So I'm very supportive of this, and I just wish you well and good luck.
Thank you, Regent Her. Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair, and I support this, but I want to give a big thank you to Dean Toller and your team for the exceptional leadership that you're providing during this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Davenport. Let's see now, where are we here now? Okay, now we flip to Regent Beeson.
Well, Mr. Chair, you departed from the A to Z and the Z to A, and that's
just keeping everybody on their toes.
Yeah, well, that's right. I do support this. I would like to actually see this be extended to 24 months because it's not going to be linear in terms of the recovery of their income. and cash flow, and I think there's no cost to us to do this essentially with where interest rates are. I'd like to give them a little more room. So as you bring this back in May, I hope you'd consider that. And I want to echo all my colleagues' comments about the work that's being done around the university, but with the medical school and UMP, since we're here talking with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Beeson. Regent Anderson.
I echo Regent Beeson's sentiments. You know, the UMP, as long as I've been on the board, has been tremendous team player with the University of Minnesota and the University of Minnesota Medical School, and anything we can do to help them that's in our purview, I'm all for that. And I would also echo the praise that there's a lot going on down there at the medical school and in the hospitals and everything. And I'd like to thank all those workers, the doctors, nurses, and all the staff that are doing the tremendous work to keep Minnesota safe. So thank you.
Thank you, Regent Anderson. Regent Swigum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Dean Toller, it seems to me, and I might be wrong, it seems to me that when we talk about revenue of the medical school, it has to be done in some conjunction, some sharing with Fairview, our partner Fairview, or a new partner Fairview. Am I correct in that? And tell me if there's been any discussion with Fairview about this or Fairview's contributions to the medical school.
Mr. Chair, Vice Chair Swigum, yes, we are continually discussing our relationship and the partnership with Fairview. We are yet to arrive at a formula whereby they would be able to share with us the CARES Act portion that they have gotten and the part of the state money that they have gotten as well. But as of now, you know, we have a healthy relationship of partnership. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Swigum, follow up?
No, that's fine, just as long as the communication's been there.
All right, good. Thank you. Regent Simonson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dean Toller, for all the work you're doing during this crisis area. Just a quick question with the medical school. I think you talked about increasing testing for, I think, PCR by about 10,000 cases a day and ELISA by about that same number. And you were going to get $20 million from the legislature, asked for it. First question, has that been granted from the legislature? And then the second question is, I'm assuming there's no revenue from increased testing, correct?
Mr. Chair, Regent Swigum, you are so good. So I will not preempt the decision of the legislature on this, but I can assure you that we have worked through the weekend around the clock on submitting the proposal along with the Mayo colleagues to the legislature. I had numerous discussions with commissioners, France and Malcolm, and Chief of Staff of the Governor and the Governor's Office. And as of this morning, everything is on a good trajectory to arrive to a decision sometimes this week. But I would rather not preempt. It's not my jurisdiction. It's not my mind to make. The decision is governors and the decision is the legislators. We will not, to your second question, seek any revenue boost from the testing alone. There has been price gouging, of course, and we will seek reimbursement, of course, and we have technology that I believe is independently derived, so it's independent of the supply chain on which most of others are dependent. This is the ingenuity of this university when we developed the antibody testing from identification on cryo-EM of the spike protein of the virus and interacting with the receptor, went through the Center for Immunology, designed the total IgG and the specific IgG testing for this, and then paired it with the molecular testing for the polymerase chain reaction. So we now have a template whereby we will offer paired testing, and that I think it provides the best safety net, for the testing of the populations. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you, Dean Toller. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support this in the current circumstance and look forward to the continuing conversation. Following up on Regent Swigum's comment, we've had Dean Tolar has been so remarkably successful with the medical school, and understanding all the complexities of the funding challenges that may come up as we go forward, I think would be, very important for this board, considering how much time and attention we've placed on this critical asset. And then I would just compliment Dean Tolar and his team on coming up with some very strong responses to the getting ahead of the wave on this thing within a very short amount of time and presumably with great information. So congratulations on your capacity to do that, and it gives me comfort that you're at the helm with your team. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. Regent McMillan.
Regent Simonson beat me to the question that I wanted to ask about where we stand with the testing funding and delivery. So thanks for that question and the detailed answer. And I'm fully on board with the financial accommodation proposed.
Thank you, Regent McMillan. Regent Mayron.
I fully support this proposal, this resolution. We'll be voting in favor at the next meeting, and I really can't add anything more to all of the comments that have been made by my colleagues, so I adopt them all.
All right, thank you, Regent Mayron, and I also plan to support this resolution, and I also want to thank Dean Tolar, you and your colleagues at the medical school and University of Minnesota physicians. You guys have made stunning contributions to the state and the country as we've worked our way through this pandemic, and we really owe you a great debt of gratitude, and we look forward to the day when we can thank you all face to face. But meanwhile, it has really been stunning. Now, I don't see anyone with a desire to speak again, and so that being the case, we'll move on to our final item. And the final item on the agenda today is the consent report for our review and action. And in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the entire board regents roster for this item. Instead, if you have a question or a comment, you want to speak, text Brian or me or raise hand, and we'll do it that way. I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. So, Senior Vice President Burnett, please, will you introduce and explain this item?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Quickly, at last month's meeting in Duluth, the board approved a capital budget amendment to do a recovery suite in the Larson Performance Center on the Twin Cities campus. This is completely funded by philanthropy. And today what we're asking for is schematic design. As members of the board may recall, the governor did exempt construction in the state of Minnesota from the stay-at-home order. And so our construction projects largely continue to go. And this is with the building in its current state, it's a tremendous time to get this moving. And so we'd ask your approval to move on the next phase of the schematic design. It's about a $1.5 million project. It was obviously funded and thought through before the pandemic, but it's still something the donors would like to see go forward. And it's a perfect time to do construction when the building's empty. Thank you.
Thank you, Senior Vice President. May I have a motion to approve the consent report?
So moved.
Is there a second?
So moved.
Okay, I hear a motion and a second. Is there any questions or commentary on this? I see. I believe Regent Hsu has a question. Please, Regent Hsu.
Well, I was just going to move it, but the only thing I have to say is that this is it's donor funded, and if the donors are still there, let's get it done.
Very good. Any other questions or comments? And I'm looking at my text messages. I don't see anything. So if there are no additional questions or comments, Mr. Steves will restate the motion and then call the roll.
So, Mr. Chair, this is on the consent report, which is approval of the schematic design for the recovery suite in the Larson Performance Center.
Please call the roll.
Regent Anderson.
Yes.
Regent Anderson votes yes. Regent Beeson.
Yes.
Regent Beeson votes yes. Regent Davenport.
Yes.
Regent Davenport votes yes. Regent Herr.
Yes.
Regent Herr votes yes. Regent Hsu.
Yes.
Regent Hsu votes yes. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Mayron.
Yes.
Regent Mayron votes yes. Regent McMillan.
Yes.
Regent McMillan votes yes. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Simonson.
Yes.
Regent Simonson votes yes. Regent Swigum.
Yes.
Regent Swigum votes yes. Chair Powell.
Yes.
Chair Powell votes yes. Mr. Chair, there are 12 in favor and 0 against.
12 in favor, 0 against. The motion passes. Thank you. Thanks to every single one of you for staying on longer today. We did go over, but I obviously, for good reason, we had a very, very good discussion and with very substantive commentary. Appreciate everyone's time and patience. There being no additional business before the board at this special meeting, we stand adjourned. Thank you all and good afternoon.